Hello there, and welcome to Planet in Question, where curiosity takes its time and wonder unfolds at its own gentle pace. Tonight, we are going to let our imagination drift into one of the most unusual and soothing what-ifs you can think of. We'll travel not just millions of years into the past, but over 65 million years, back to a world when the Earth was warm, green, and full of giants. The age of dinosaurs. You've probably heard that phrase before, and maybe seen the images it conjures up. Vast reptiles moving through fern-covered forests, flying creatures gliding across endless skies, oceans full of teeth and shadows. But tonight we will ask a question that usually belongs more to late-night dreams than to textbooks. What if, hidden somewhere in that ancient time, there had been a civilization? Not one that looks exactly like ours, with concrete towers and glowing cities, but some form of intelligent, organized society that lived quietly in the age of dinosaurs and vanished before we ever arrived to notice. When you let that question rest in your mind, it feels both impossible and strangely calming. Impossible because the fossil record, as far as we can tell, gives us no proof of such a thing. And calming because it reminds us of how vast Earth's history really is, how full of spaces and silences it can be, and how much room there is for speculation. A thought like this is not meant to be an answer but a companion, something to wander with as you close your eyes or let the day soften around you. So let's start slowly, by grounding ourselves. Right now, as you listen, you might be curled beneath a blanket or resting on a couch, or maybe even out walking with the sound of the world just beyond your headphones. Whatever moment you find yourself in, picture this. The ground beneath you is not just ground, it is the layered memory of the earth. Beneath your feet are stones, and beneath those stones are older stones still. Keep going deeper and you move into chapters of history stacked one on top of the other, reaching back billions of years. Somewhere deep in those layers there are traces of forests that have turned to coal, oceans that hardened into limestone, and creatures long vanished whose bodies were pressed into fossils. It is in those buried pages that we find dinosaurs. The dinosaurs lived across an enormous span of time, longer than humans have been around, longer even than the entire history of mammals. From the late Triassic through the Jurassic and into the Cretaceous, they flourished for over 165 million years. That length is hard to picture. Imagine condensing Earth's whole history into a single day. Dinosaurs would have appeared around 10:30 at night, lived through hour after hour of the evening, and then finally disappeared just before midnight. Humans, by comparison, arrive in only the last seconds before the day ends. That should already tell us something about how small our story is compared to theirs. And yet, as far as we know, dinosaurs did not build civilizations. But what if they did? Or, to take the question more gently, what if some form of intelligence, some kind of organized society, lived quietly alongside them? To even imagine this, we have to broaden our idea of what civilization means. We are used to thinking of it as cities, monuments, written records, technology, but at its heart, civilization is simply groups of beings working together, sharing knowledge, shaping their environment in lasting ways. If we let that be our definition, the door opens wider. Civilization could take many forms, different materials, different languages, different tools. Perhaps a community in the Mesozoic would not leave behind stone temples or steel skyscrapers. Perhaps their world was woven from wood, from bone, from plant fibers that could never fossilize. Time is not kind to fragile things. Even our own modern world, with its skyscrapers and satellites, would vanish almost entirely after a few million years. Imagine the age of dinosaurs stretching across hundreds of millions. Could a society have risen and fallen in that vastness, its traces erased by volcanoes, shifting seas, and the slow grind of plate tectonics? It is humbling to think about how forgetful the Earth can be. If a city were abandoned today, in just a few centuries nature would reclaim it. In a few thousand years stone would crumble, steel would rust, glass would break down. In a few million years the land might rise or sink, rivers might wash over it, glaciers might grind it to gravel. Fossils form rarely, and mostly by accident. They preserve bones and shells, not wood huts or woven baskets. If a civilization from the Mesozoic had used organic tools, lived lightly in forests, or built with materials we would never recognize, would we even know it had existed? The silence of the record does not prove impossibility. It only tells us how fragile memory can be. Now imagine the Earth of that time. The continents were not in their present shape. They were breaking apart from the great landmass of Pangaea, drifting slowly toward the arrangement we know today. Warm, shallow seas spread across continents, creating lush coastlines. Giant ferns and cycads filled forests. The air itself was thicker with oxygen, supporting insects larger than any alive now. Into this world stepped dinosaurs of every size and form, some towering above the trees, some darting lightly on two legs, some covered in feathers that hinted at the birds they would become. A civilization living here would not be the dominant presence we imagine ourselves to be today. It would have been small, cautious, maybe hiding in valleys or cliffs, trying to survive among creatures that could crush them with a single step. That image too is humbling. Intelligence not as master, but as survivor. And yet, survival breeds ingenuity. To live through storms, predators, and shifting landscapes, any society would need tools, cooperation, and stories to pass along knowledge. Maybe they learned to use volcanic glass as blades. Maybe they built shelters woven into the thick ferns or carved into stone. Maybe they used fire carefully, keeping it alive in clay vessels against the wet seasons. We cannot know, but imagining it places us in a different kind of history, one where we are not the only experiment of intelligence, but one of many. This idea is sometimes whispered about in science under a thought experiment called the Silurian hypothesis. It asks, if an industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, would we even know? Would the traces survive long enough for us to notice? And the unsettling answer is that we might not. A layer of unusual metals, a change in atmospheric chemistry, a strange deposit in rocks, these might be the only whispers. And those whispers could just as easily be mistaken for natural events. So, tonight, as we begin this gentle journey, we are not searching for proof or answers. We are letting ourselves rest in possibility. We are wandering into the thought that Earth's past may have been richer, stranger, more complicated than we assume. A civilization in the age of dinosaurs may never have existed, but imagining it gives us perspective. It reminds us that we too are temporary, that the Earth forgets more than it remembers, and that intelligence may not be as unique as we sometimes believe. And so, with that thought, let us step softly into this story. Let us walk through the fern forests, hear the distant calls of great reptiles, feel the weight of time all around us, and wonder. What if, in that ancient age, there were other minds, other voices, other civilizations whose stories have been lost to stone and silence? Tonight, we will let the possibility unfold slowly, chapter by chapter, like the turning of pages in a book that has no end. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine yourself standing on Earth, but not the Earth you know. There are no cities, no highways, no sound of airplanes cutting through the sky. The continents themselves are different, still drifting toward the shapes we'd recognize today, still splitting apart from the vast supercontinent of Pangaea. The air feels heavier, the sky perhaps a deeper blue tinged with more haze, the warmth of the sun spreading across a planet where glaciers are rare and tropical forests stretch almost to the poles. This is the stage of the Mesozoic, the great age of dinosaurs, and into this lush and restless world, we are about to wonder, if a civilization had emerged here, what would it have seen? What would it have felt? And how would it have survived among giants? To set the scene properly, we should first slow down and let the land itself come alive in our imagination. The forests of the Jurassic and Cretaceous were dense with towering conifers, cycads with stiff palm-like leaves, and sprawling ferns that formed a thick green underlayer. There were no flowering plants yet, no fields of colourful blossoms or buzzing bees. The world smelled different, rich with resin and damp soil, heavy with the scent of giant vegetation. Insects clicked and whirred in the undergrowth, dragonflies with wingspans wider than your hand, beetles with armoured shells that glinted in the sunday. Rivers wound slowly through lowlands, their banks crowded with horsetail plants taller than a person. Beyond those rivers, in the distance, mountains rose from volcanic origins, their slopes steaming where lava had recently cooled. Now, picture the animals. Dinosaurs were not just the massive predators we imagine from popular films. They were diverse, filling nearly every niche. Some herds grazed quietly, moving in long lines across open plains, their long necks sweeping down to gather ferns and up again toward the tops of conifer trees. Others darted through the forests on nimble legs, feathered or scaled, snapping at smaller prey. Above it all, Flying reptiles glided, their shadows crossing the forest floor. In the seas, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs swam like strange echoes of dolphins and whales. Life was abundant, noisy, and in constant motion. For a civilization to exist in such a place, it would need to carve out a space within this teeming and often dangerous world. Imagine standing in a clearing, looking up at a sauropod moving past, its footfall sending tremors through the ground. Imagine listening at night to the distant calls of predators, low roars echoing across valleys. In such an environment, survival would not come easily. Any intelligent beings here would need to live carefully, weaving themselves into the rhythms of nature without drawing too much attention. Unlike us, who spread across the planet with confidence, they might have chosen hidden valleys, high plateaus, or even coastal caves where the great dinosaurs rarely ventured. Their settlements could have blended into the forests, camouflaged and quiet, invisible even if we were to stumble across them now. The very idea of civilization here forces us to stretch our definitions. Civilization, as we usually imagine it, is built on agriculture, permanent dwellings, trade, and shared knowledge. But in a world where giant reptiles roam and flowering plants do not yet exist, agriculture would look very different. Maybe they cultivated ferns, or harvested seeds from cycads, or learned to gather resin from conifers. Maybe their relationship with food was more about careful gathering than farming, more about cooperation with the landscape than reshaping it. Fire would have been precious in this damp green world, and using it recklessly would have risked calling attention to predators. Tools might have been carved from bone, sharpened from obsidian, or even woven from plant fibers that never stood a chance of fossilizing. We would expect ruins of stone and metal, but perhaps what they left behind was softer, easily erased by time. This is where the silence of the fossil record becomes almost eerie. We have grown used to thinking that if something existed, we would find it eventually. But the Earth is not generous with memory. Fossils themselves are rare accidents, formed only when conditions are just right, and entire civilizations, especially those that live lightly on the land, might leave almost nothing at all. Imagine a settlement built of wood and clay 100 million years ago. Rain would wash it away in decades, vegetation would reclaim it in centuries, rivers would carry the remains into the sea. Then add millions upon millions of years, volcanoes erupt, continents drift, mountains rise and fall, glaciers scrape across the land. It is not just erasure, it is rewriting. The page is not blank because nothing was written. It is blank because it has been written over too many times. And so we are left with possibility. We can stand on a hillside in our minds, watching a herd of dinosaurs pass, and wonder if perhaps, somewhere not far from that scene, there were other beings watching too. Maybe they had their own names for the stars, their own rituals for fire, their own stories about the creatures that towered over them. Maybe they lived for tens of thousands of years and then vanished in the sweep of deep time. Their traces ground into dust, their memory carried only in the imagination of future dreamers like us. It is in that space between what we know and what we cannot prove that this thought becomes soothing. The age of dinosaurs stretches across such a long and unreachable distance that we will never have all the answers. And so, instead of rushing to find proof, we can linger in the wonder of not knowing. Perhaps the Earth has been host to more stories than we can imagine. Perhaps intelligence, like forests and oceans, has risen and fallen many times, leaving only whispers in stone. When you think about it this way, the stage is set not just for dinosaurs, but for endless possibilities. The forests, the mountains, the seas, they were all there, ready to hold not just life, but the spark of civilization. Whether or not it ever happened, we may never know. But in imagining it, we feel ourselves connected to that ancient Earth, walking softly among giants, listening for voices that may never have been, and finding comfort in the vastness of time. 2. Redefining civilization. When we hear the word civilization, our minds often leap to familiar images. We picture tall stone walls, temples rising against the horizon, streets lined with markets and homes, and perhaps the written records of laws and stories. Civilization, to us, feels bound to cities, to agriculture, to monuments that endure. But if we are to truly imagine what a civilization might have looked like in the time of dinosaurs, we must gently set aside our own definitions and open ourselves to the possibility that civilization can take many forms. It may not have looked like marble columns or golden crowns. It may not have left the marks we expect. It may have been quieter, softer, fleeting, yet no less meaningful for those who lived within it. Consider first the essence of what civilization really is. At its heart, it is not about buildings or technology. It is about cooperation. It is about groups of beings deciding, whether by instinct or intention, to live together in ways that go beyond simple survival. Civilization begins when knowledge is shared, when traditions are passed down, when individuals join into something larger than themselves. That can happen in a cluster of huts or in the hidden pathways of a forest. It can happen without stone walls, without writing, without metals. Civilization is not a shape we can measure, but a rhythm, a continuity of thought and action carried across generations. Now imagine what that might mean in the age of dinosaurs. Picture a group of beings perhaps not human at all, perhaps a lineage of intelligent reptilian creatures, or even an entirely different experiment of life that learned to live together with intention. They might have built their lives not around permanence but adaptability. Instead of heavy stone, they may have chosen wood, vines, clay, or bone, all materials abundant in their world but fragile in the face of time. Their homes may have been woven into trees, or burrowed into hillsides, or floated on rafts along rivers. If they worked with fire, it might have been in a controlled, almost sacred way, guarded and passed down carefully. If they made tools, perhaps they were shaped from volcanic glass, sharp enough to cut but brittle and easily lost. Imagine a knife chipped from obsidian, used for generations and then broken, buried and forgotten. After 100 million years, not even a shard might remain for us to find. Our human perspective can be limiting. We measure civilization by the traces we can see, ruins, artifacts, written words. But perhaps that is only one way to leave a mark. What if a civilization chose to leave almost nothing behind? What if its greatest achievements were in song, in spoken story, in rituals performed under the stars? The wind carries music. The earth swallows voices. Nothing remains but the memories of those who once heard them. To us, such a civilization would be invisible. To them, it would have been everything. We should also consider that intelligence need not look like ours. Dolphins, crows, and octopuses today already display remarkable problem-solving, memory, and cooperation. They use tools, recognize themselves, and even invent play. If such sparks of intelligence exist now in such different forms, why could they not have bloomed long ago into something greater? Perhaps there were creatures who organized hunting parties, who shared food across communities, who communicated through patterns of sound or color that we could never decode. To them, that might have been civilization, even if it left no ruins to study. Civilization, then, could be less about the material and more about the intangible, about connection, about continuity, about shaping life beyond the needs of the moment. It is humbling to realize how fragile even our own evidence is. The oldest true city built by humans, places like Jericho or Çatalhöyük, are only around 10,000 years old. The Great Pyramids of Egypt, which feel impossibly ancient to us, are barely 5,000 years old. If you add a few million years, even those stones would crumble, shift, and vanish. If an industrial civilization like ours disappeared, the most lasting signs might not be our buildings, but thin layers of chemical change in the earth. Carbon, metals, radioactive isotopes. In tens of millions of years, even those would blur into the background. What hope would we have of finding the faint marks of a civilization that lived in the time of dinosaurs, using only perishable materials and leaving no chemical fingerprint? The silence of the record is not proof of absence. It is a reminder of how easily stories fade. There is another way to stretch this thought. Civilization may not always aim for growth or permanence. We humans often assume that progress means expansion, construction, permanence. But what if another intelligence thought differently? What if their idea of success was balance, leaving the land untouched, blending seamlessly into the cycles of forest and sea? To us, that would leave nothing visible, but to them, it might have been the highest form of achievement. A civilization not of monuments but of harmony, a way of life designed not to dominate but to endure quietly. Such a society might have lasted for tens of thousands of years, leaving no scars, no ruins, no evidence that could withstand the crushing passage of geological time. And so, when we ask ourselves whether a civilization could have existed during the age of dinosaurs, perhaps the more important question is what we mean by civilization at all. If it means stone walls and metal tools, then perhaps not. But if it means cooperation, knowledge, shared stories, then who is to say it could not have flickered here and there, rising and falling in ways the Earth has long since erased? Civilization is a spectrum, not a single definition. Our human story is only one version. The Earth may have held others before us. As you let this idea settle, notice how it shifts your sense of time. Civilization, in this gentler view, is not the pinnacle of history, but a pattern that may appear again and again in different shapes, in different ages, among different beings. We are one thread in a vast and tangled fabric. Whether or not others lived in the shadow of dinosaurs, the possibility is a reminder that we are not inevitable, that intelligence is not a straight line leading to us. It is an experiment, fragile, fleeting, and always subject to the turning of the Earth. So here we pause, with the stage set and the definition widened. Civilization in the age of dinosaurs might not look like our story at all. It might not look like skyscrapers or writing on stone. It might look like songs carried on the wind, like fires tended in the night, like communities hidden among ferns and trees, living lives as real and meaningful as ours, but gone without a trace. And even if it never happened, the thought itself is enough to remind us of the beauty of possibility and the humility of our own small place in Earth's great story. 3. A planet in motion. If we are going to imagine a civilization during the age of dinosaurs, then we must also imagine the Earth itself as it was, because the land beneath their feet was not still, not fixed, not quiet. The Earth has never been a stage frozen in place. It has always been a restless and shifting actor in the story. Mountains rise, oceans spread, rivers carve valleys, and continents drift apart or crash together again. In the time of the dinosaurs, this motion was constant and immense. To picture their world, and any civilization that might have lived within it, we must learn to see the Earth not as stable ground, but as something alive, always moving. During the Triassic period, when the first dinosaurs began to appear, the continents were still gathered together in the great supercontinent known as Pangaea. Imagine it. Nearly all of the Earth's land clumped into one enormous mass, stretching from pole to pole. Deserts spread across its centre, vast and dry, while coasts and river systems hugged its edges. By the Jurassic, this landmass began to split apart, pulled by forces deep within the mantle. Giant rifts opened, seas spilled into them, and islands of life began to separate from one another. By the Cretaceous, the world was more familiar, continents drifting toward the positions we know today, though still different, their edges drowned beneath shallow seas. In the middle of North America, for example, there was an inland sea so wide you could sail from the Gulf of Mexico to the Arctic Ocean. It is in this shifting landscape that dinosaurs thrived, and if a civilization existed, they would have had to adapt constantly to a world that never stayed the same for long. Think of what that would mean for daily life. A people living on a stretch of fertile plain might, within generations, find their land swallowed by rising waters. A settlement carved into volcanic rock might be buried overnight by eruptions. Valleys that once carried rivers might dry into deserts. To us, this sounds like catastrophe. To them, it might have been simply the rhythm of existence. Their stories, if they had them, might not have been about permanence but about change. Their myths may not have described eternal kingdoms but waves of creation and destruction, cycles of land and water, stories of earth that moves like breathing. Civilization in such a world could never cling to stillness. It would have had to learn the art of motion, of letting go, of moving with the planet's restless heart. Consider, too, the violence of this age. Volcanic activity was far more common than today. Imagine skies darkened for weeks with ash, rivers of lava spilling across plains, fire and stone reshaping everything in moments. Earthquakes rippled through rift valleys as the great continent tore itself apart. Ocean currents shifted, climates swung, polar regions sometimes warmed into lush forests, and then cooled again. In such conditions, any people would need resilience. They might have built settlements that were temporary, meant to be left behind at a moment's notice. They might have become nomadic, following safe seasons, migrating away from erupting mountains, returning only when the land had healed. The seas themselves were alive with motion. Tides surged stronger in some places where the moon's pull met shallow waters. Inland seas came and went, sometimes slowly over thousands of years, sometimes rapidly after tectonic shifts. A civilization here might have relied on boats or rafts, crafting vessels from the enormous trees that grew along coasts. They might have travelled the waters like migratory birds, carrying stories and goods from one shoreline to another, following the rhythms of tides and currents the way we follow maps today. Imagine their view of the sky, with continents shifting beneath them, with volcanoes painting the horizon red, with comets and eclipses occasionally startling the world. The heavens would have seemed alive as well. Perhaps they looked upward and told each other stories about why the ground moved, why the seas rose, why the mountains spat fire. Perhaps their civilization was built not on trying to stop the earth, but on learning how to live in step with it. And yet, despite all this movement, life thrived. Dinosaurs grew larger and more diverse. Plants spread across new lands. Ecosystems rebuilt themselves after each upheaval. The earth in motion was not only destructive but creative, opening new paths, new environments, new chances for life to flourish. A civilization living then might have understood this better than we do. They might not have seen destruction as an ending, but as part of the cycle of renewal. When the land shifted, it revealed new places to explore. When seas rose, they brought new fish, new opportunities. When forests burned, new growth followed. Civilization in such a place would have been an act of trust in the Earth's endless transformation. It is tempting to imagine permanence, to think of civilizations as things that build upward, stone upon stone, meant to last forever. But the Earth does not honour permanence. It honours change. Perhaps a Mesozoic civilization would have known this in their bones. Perhaps their art, if they had art, was not carved into stone but drawn in sand or woven in leaves, meant to fade and be remade. Perhaps their lives were not about monuments but about continuity through change, passing on knowledge like a current that flows even as the riverbed shifts. As we picture this, let us remember that even our own story is bound to the same restless planet. Our cities stand now, but they too are temporary. Oceans may rise to swallow them, mountains may crumble, climates may shift again. We too live on a planet in motion, though our lives are too brief to feel it fully. Imagining a civilization among the dinosaurs is also a way of reminding ourselves that the Earth will outlast us, as it outlasted them, as it outlasted anything that came before. And so, the stage is set not on still ground but on shifting continents, rising mountains, boiling seas, a world of motion, violent yet creative, perilous yet full of possibility. If a civilization lived then, it was a civilization that danced with the Earth's restlessness, that built its culture not around holding the world still but around moving with it. Whether it truly happened, we cannot know. But imagining it draws us closer to the truth that life itself is always in motion, that civilization, like rivers and mountains, must flow, change, and sometimes disappear, only to leave space for something new. 4. Companions of giants. To imagine a civilization during the age of dinosaurs is also to imagine the presence of giants, living mountains of muscle and bone that towered above forests, grazed on treetops, or stalked prey with claws and teeth. For us, the idea of sharing the earth with creatures so large is both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Yet if a civilization had lived during this time, the dinosaurs would not have been a distant idea in textbooks or a spectacle in movies. They would have been neighbours, companions in the most literal sense. The rhythms of life, the choices of settlement, the fears whispered at night, all would have been shaped by the presence of these colossal creatures. Picture standing at the edge of a Mesozoic river valley. Across the water, you see a herd of sauropods moving slowly, their necks reaching high into the canopy. Each step shakes the ground faintly, like distant thunder. They are not predators, not threats, but their sheer size demands respect. To walk among them is to walk in the shadow of beings that seem almost eternal. For a small and fragile civilization, such herds would have been both a danger and a gift. The danger lies in their scale. One misstep, one startled movement, and a life could be ended beneath a careless foot. But the gift is in the protection such herds might offer. Predators followed prey, but they also hesitated before attacking groups of giants. A settlement near sauropod herds might have found safety in their presence, much as some human societies later relied on herds of cattle or elephants. Not all dinosaurs, of course, were so gentle. The forests and plains also belonged to predators, Imagine the echo of a distant roar carried through the trees, a sound deeper than any animal we know today. The great theropods creatures like Allosaurus or later Tyrannosaurus would have been apex hunters, swift and relentless. For a civilization trying to survive, such predators would have been the embodiment of fear, shaping habits, stories, and defenses. Nights might have been spent in shelters built high in trees or tucked into caves, where the sounds of the forest could be monitored from safety. Fires may have been kept burning not just for warmth, but as signals, as barriers of light to keep hunters at bay. Entire rituals might have grown around protection from predators, with myths that explained their hunger, their strength, their place in the order of the world. And yet, it is also possible that these creatures were not only feared, but studied, admired, even followed. Just as humans today observe the migrations of animals, perhaps a civilization in the age of dinosaurs learned the patterns of predator and prey. They may have shadowed the herds, gathering plants from the disturbed soil, scavenging the remains of predator kills, learning which territories were safe and which were claimed by hunters. To live among giants is to live humbly, aware that survival depends on understanding forces far larger than oneself. Civilization in such a world might not have been about dominance, but about careful observation and coexistence. There is another layer to consider, the possibility of cooperation. We often assume that humans are the only creatures who have formed partnerships with animals, but even in nature today, many species benefit from unlikely alliances. Birds clean parasites from large mammals, fish escort sharks, and wolves once became our companions. If a civilization had existed during the age of dinosaurs, might it have sought alliances too? Perhaps smaller dinosaurs, feathered and quick, were drawn to settlements for scraps of food, gradually forming bonds that blurred the line between wild and tame. Perhaps herds of gentle giants served as unknowing guardians, their presence deterring predators from approaching human-like communities. In this way, the dinosaurs themselves might have been woven into the fabric of civilization, not as domesticated animals, but as powerful companions that shaped the rhythm of life. The awe such beings would inspire is difficult for us to capture. Today we marvel at elephants, at whales, at the few giants that remain among us. Now imagine living in a world where such awe was multiplied by hundreds, where giants walked not in distant oceans or protected reserves, but across the very land where you gathered food and built shelter. Their presence would have filled not just the landscape, but the imagination. Myths and stories might have cast them as gods, as forces of nature given flesh. To see a sauropod against the setting sun, neck stretching into the clouds, would have been to see something divine. Civilization in this time might have been shaped as much by reverence as by survival. At the same time, fragility would have been constant. Any group trying to exist alongside such creatures would have lived with daily reminders of their own smallness. Even without predators, the danger of being crushed, trampled, or caught in a stampede would have been real. Settlements may have been deliberately hidden, tucked into cliffsides or built above water where giants could not easily tread. Children would have grown up listening to the sounds of creatures so large they seemed to shape the earth itself. To them, the thundering approach of herds would not be unusual but ordinary, a fact of life, like the changing of seasons. And then there is the question of perspective. We look at dinosaurs as relics of the past, creatures defined by extinction. But for those who might have lived among them, they would have been the present, the fabric of reality. Civilization would have grown not in spite of them, but within their world. A world where the giants were not symbols of a lost age, but living companions whose presence shaped every choice, every ritual, every dream. It is humbling to place ourselves in such a vision. We live now on a planet where humans dominate, where no animal towers above us in scale or power. But in imagining a civilization among dinosaurs, we are reminded that this was not always so, and may not always be so. Life does not guarantee dominance. It guarantees only the chance to survive alongside others, however great or small. Perhaps a civilization in the Mesozoic would have understood this truth more deeply than we do. They would have known that their lives were measured not by their ability to control the giants around them, but by their ability to live in harmony, to watch, to adapt, to respect. And so, as we let our minds wander into this strange possibility, we begin to see the dinosaurs not only as rulers of their time, but as companions in a larger story. A story where civilization, however fragile, walked softly beside giants, shaped not by conquest but by coexistence. Whether such a story was ever written in truth, we may never know. But in imagining it, we find a kind of peace. For it reminds us that civilization does not need to stand tallest to be real. Sometimes it simply needs to endure, quietly, beneath the shadows of giants. 5. The tools they might use. When we picture a civilization, our thoughts quickly turn to tools. They are the visible proof of ingenuity, the bridge between imagination and action. For us, tools are made of metals, plastics, wires, and circuits. But to imagine a civilization living in the age of dinosaurs is to step into a world before iron, before bronze, even before the simplest forms of human metallurgy. If such a society had ever existed, their tools would have been drawn entirely from the natural world around them. Stone, bone, wood, shell, resin, and fire. Fragile things, mostly, the kinds of materials that do not fossilize well, that crumble and vanish across millions of years. And yet, those tools might have been enough. Enough to build shelters, enough to hunt or defend, enough to share knowledge and shape culture in ways that, for them, would have been revolutionary. Let us slow down and imagine their first tools. Perhaps they began with stone, as we once did. The ancient earth was generous with volcanic glass, obsidian so sharp that even today it can cut finer than surgical steel. A single strike against another stone can flake off an edge thin enough to slice through hide or plant fibers. Such blades would not last long, they would chip and break, but they would be endlessly renewable, crafted again and again by skilled hands. Maybe there were entire traditions around knapping stone, songs sung while flakes fell, stories told about which rocks were best, passed down to the next generation like recipes. These would not leave the grand marks of pyramids or temples, but they would leave knowledge, living and breathing in memory. Bone, too, would have been abundant. With giants all around, bones could be found in every corner of the landscape, scattered after predator kills, left behind by floods or volcanic ash. A femur from a great beast could be shaped into clubs, pestles, or handles. Smaller bones could be sharpened into awls, needles, or hooks. Imagine a community where the remains of dinosaurs were not just awe-inspiring but practical, woven into daily life. Perhaps they saw the bones of giants as gifts, tools offered by the earth itself, carrying the strength of the creatures they once belonged to. Working with them might have been more than craft, it could have been ritual, a way of honouring the giants while borrowing their strength. Wood would have been another essential companion. Dense forests of conifers, cycads and ferns stretched across much of the Mesozoic world. Trees provided shelter from rain, leaves for weaving, resins for sealing, and trunks for carving. A civilization might have learned to split wood into planks, to carve it into boats, to lash it together into frames for homes raised above swampy ground. Resin could be used to waterproof baskets, or as adhesive to hold stone blades against wooden handles. With vines as rope, with wood as frame, with leaves as covering, entire villages could be built. None of it would survive the march of 100 million years, but for those who lived among it, it would have been as solid and real as our skyscrapers are to us today. Then there is fire, the most fragile and yet the most powerful tool of all. To keep fire alive in a world so lush and damp would not have been simple. Rain would threaten to extinguish it, winds to scatter its embers. Perhaps fire was kept in clay pots, tended carefully, guarded like treasure. Maybe every village had a keeper of flame, someone whose role was to make sure that fire never died out, passing coals from hearth to hearth, carrying embers on journeys. With fire they could cook food, harden wooden spear tips, shape resin into useful forms, and keep predators at bay. Fire would not have been a casual thing. It would have been sacred, woven into every story of survival and every ritual of community. It is tempting to imagine that such tools would be crude compared to ours, but to those who used them, they would have been advanced, even miraculous. A stone blade sharp enough to cut through hide would transform the act of hunting. A woven basket sturdy enough to carry food would change the rhythms of gathering. A boat strong enough to cross a river would open new worlds of travel. Civilization is not measured by the complexity of its tools, but by what those tools allow a life that goes beyond the immediate moment. A culture that can look ahead. A people who can imagine tomorrow. And what of art? Tools are not always about survival. Sometimes they are about expression, about reaching for beauty or meaning. Perhaps they carved symbols into bone or etched designs into stone. Perhaps they shaped clay into figures, not to store food but to tell stories, to hold memory in physical form. These objects, made of fragile material, would long ago have been crushed, burned, or eroded. But for the people who held them, they would have been reminders that civilization is not only about necessity, it is also about imagination. The silence of the fossil record once again comes to mind. Stone tools, if they existed, might still lie buried somewhere, mistaken for natural fragments. Wooden tools, woven baskets, clay vessels, all would vanish. Even fire leaves little behind unless it is trapped in charred layers that survive by chance. If we search for civilizations in the age of dinosaurs by looking for monuments, we will find nothing. But if we broaden our sense of what tools could be, if we allow ourselves to imagine softer, smaller, more fragile creations, then a different picture emerges. A picture of ingenuity hidden from time, of lives shaped by tools that were never meant to last forever. In a way, this fragility feels appropriate. A civilization that lived among dinosaurs would have known how small it was in comparison to the giants around it. Their tools, too, would have reflected that humility, light, adaptable, woven from the world rather than imposed upon it. A spear may not bring down a tyrannosaur, but it could catch fish in shallow waters. A basket may not last 100 years, but it could carry fruit from forest to village. These small victories, repeated day after day, are what truly sustain civilization. Not towering monuments, but the simple tools that allow people to share, to survive, to dream. And so, when we let our minds drift back to that ancient time, let us picture not cities of stone, but villages of wood and clay, fires tended in the night, stone blades flashing in the sun, bone needles stitching hides, resin sealing boats. Let us imagine tools not as relics to endure for eternity, but as companions to fleeting lives, shaped and reshaped, used and worn away, forgotten by the earth but remembered perhaps in the quiet imagination of those who wander. In doing so, we see that civilization is not only about what is left behind, it is about what is lived, even if only for a moment, in a world of giants. 6. Cities lost to time. When we think of civilization, our minds drift inevitably to cities, great gatherings of people clustered together in places that become more than homes. They become symbols, centers of culture, of trade, of power. Our imagination is steeped in ruins, stone blocks piled high in pyramids, arches standing against the sky, walls etched with carvings. Cities are what we leave behind, the proof that we were here. But if we are to wonder about a civilization in the time of dinosaurs, we must ask, what would their cities have looked like, and why have they left us nothing? Let us begin by loosening our grip on the word city. To us it means stone and concrete, something meant to endure for centuries. But in truth, a city is simply a place where people gather and live together, where life is shared in numbers greater than a family or a village. It does not need stone, it does not need towers. It needs only community and continuity. A city among the ferns and cycads of the Mesozoic might have been something very different from what we know. Perhaps it was a cluster of wooden dwellings raised above swampy ground, connected by woven walkways. Perhaps it was a network of cliffside shelters, carved into volcanic rock where predators could not reach. Perhaps it was even temporary, rebuilt season by season as rivers changed course or forests burned and grew again. A city, then, could have been an idea more than a place, an agreement that people would live together, trade and share. If such cities existed, their traces would not last. Wood rots, clay crumbles, fibers dissolve. The forest would reclaim it in a matter of decades. Storms would level it within centuries, and within thousands of years not a trace would remain. Add to that the restless motion of Earth itself. Rivers carving new channels, seas rising and falling, mountains growing and then wearing away. Now, stretch the timeline into tens of millions, even 100 million years. What chance would there be for a city of wood and clay to leave even a whisper behind? The earth would fold it into itself, rewriting the page until no reader could tell it had ever been written. But even if no ruins remain, we can still imagine the life within those lost cities. Picture a settlement nestled at the edge of a dense forest, where the ferns open into a clearing. In the morning, smoke drifts lightly from fires as families prepare food. Children play near the riverbank, chasing each other through the reeds, While adults repair boats, carve tools, weave mats, there is laughter, there is song, there are shared stories as the sun rises. At night, torches burn softly, voices rise in ritual, and the city feels alive, even though it is made only of fragile things. For them, it is not fragile at all. For them, it is home, as solid and eternal as our own cities feel to us today. We might ask, why build cities at all in such a dangerous world? Why not stay scattered, hidden, avoiding the notice of predators and giants? But cities bring strength. They offer safety in numbers, the ability to watch together, to defend together, to pool knowledge and resources. A lone family cannot keep fire alive forever, but a city can. A single hunter may fail, but many can succeed. Cities also allow culture to flourish, stories to be passed down, traditions to be shared. A song sung by one becomes a chorus when hundreds join. Even in the shadow of dinosaurs, even in a world of predators and storms, the urge to gather would still be there. Civilization always gathers, because gathering is how life finds meaning beyond survival. If such cities rose and fell, their disappearance is not surprising. Consider how easily our own cities could vanish. Imagine one of our great metropolises, say, New York or Tokyo, abandoned entirely. Within a few centuries, plants would crack pavement, buildings would fall, animals would reclaim streets. Within a few thousand years, rivers and weather would erase the rest. Within 1,000,000 years, there would be little left but the faintest disturbances in soil. Within 10 million, nothing at all. Our cities feel eternal only because we live inside their brief moment. In the scale of Earth, they are fireflies flashing in the night. Perhaps the same was true of any civilization during the Mesozoic. Their cities flared for a while, bright and alive, and then vanished into the soil. Not lost in the sense of forgotten, but lost in the sense of folded back into the earth, recycled, made new again. Their memory would exist only in the people who lived there, and when they were gone, the cities would be gone too. And yet, there is something calming in this thought. A city does not need to endure for millions of years to have mattered. Its worth is not in what it leaves behind for strangers in the far future, but in what it gives to those who live within it. A city is laughter carried across rooftops, footsteps echoing on pathways, songs rising by firelight. Those moments, though long gone, were real. They mattered then, and perhaps that is enough. So when we imagine lost cities of the dinosaur age, we do not need to picture ruins of stone. We can picture something more fleeting, more delicate, more human or more alien, depending on who lived there. A city could have been woven from reeds, painted in bright colours, decorated with feathers and shells. It could have been carved into caves, lit with glowing resin, filled with echoes of song. It could have been nomadic, carried on the backs of boats, always moving, never fixed. Each possibility reminds us that civilization is not one shape, but many. It is not a monument, but a way of living together, in any form the earth allows. If such cities were real, they are gone now, erased so completely that even the bones of the creatures who lived among them would be rare. But the possibility of them lingers, like an echo. It asks us to remember that Earth has been home to countless experiments, countless stories, most of which we will never know. We are not the only ones who could have dreamed of gathering, of building, of belonging. Perhaps others dreamed too, long ago, and though the earth has silenced their traces, we can still listen for them in our imagination. And so, the thought of cities lost to time is not sad but strangely comforting. It reminds us that permanence is an illusion, that all cities are temporary, even ours. What matters is not how long they last, but how they shape the lives within them, how they allow communities to grow, to share, to dream. Somewhere in the deep past, maybe among the ferns and the thunder of giant footsteps, there were cities once, alive for a moment, gone forever. And that, in its own way, is enough. 7. Echoes in fossils. When we look for the past, we lean on fossils. They are the fragments of time that manage to hold on, the bones and shells and impressions that survive the weight of ages. Fossils are not the past itself, but echoes of it, half-heard whispers carried through stone. For us, they are precious because they are rare, and because they tell us something we could never know otherwise, that the earth remembers, but only in fragments. And so, if we are to wonder about civilization in the age of dinosaurs, We must think carefully about what the fossil record can tell us, and more importantly, what it cannot. Most fossils form only by chance. A creature dies in just the right place, perhaps swept into a riverbed, perhaps buried in volcanic ash, perhaps sealed away in tar. Then, over long ages, sediment covers the remains, pressure builds, minerals seep in, and slowly, what was once bone becomes stone. Even then, the fossil must survive earthquakes, erosion, the grinding of glaciers, and the shifting of continents. Out of all the countless living beings that have ever walked this planet, only a fraction of a fraction are preserved. The rest vanish entirely, their existence remembered only in the moment they lived. What this means is humbling. If even bones, the hardest part of living things, are so rarely saved, what chance do the fragile traces of a civilization have? Wood decays, fibre rots, clay crumbles, fire leaves only ash that disperses with the wind. Even stone tools, if they existed, could easily be lost among natural rocks, unrecognizable after millions of years of wear. The earth is not a careful archivist. It does not preserve with intent. It remembers in accidents, in interruptions, in sudden burials that freeze moments in time. Civilization, if it existed in the age of dinosaurs, may have left behind nothing the earth chose to keep. And yet, we keep listening for echoes. When paleontologists dig into the ground, they are listening to the earth's memory. They find footprints hardened into rock, the curve of a rib cage, the outline of a feather. Sometimes, even the delicate patterns of skin or the contents of a stomach are preserved. These are astonishing survivals, like voices carried through unimaginable silence. If such details can survive, then it is not impossible that the faint traces of civilization could survive too. A shard of shaped stone, a fragment of pigment, a mark carved deliberately into rock. But if such things exist, they are buried deep, and we may never stumble upon them. It is easy to think that absence of evidence is evidence of absence, but when we think about the sheer scale of time, the vastness of Earth, and the fragility of memory, we realize how easily entire stories could be erased. Consider that human history itself, the entire span of our species, has barely touched the fossil record. Out of all our ancient villages and tools, how many will be preserved for tens of millions of years? Perhaps almost none. If someone were to search for us 100 million years from now, they might find a thin layer of chemical traces in the rocks, but little else. If that is true for us, with all our concrete and steel, how much more true would it be for a civilization that lived lightly among ferns and giants? The silence of fossils is not empty, though. It invites us to imagine. Each missing piece is a space for wonder. When we hold the fossil of a dinosaur's footprint, we feel the presence of something that walked here long ago. It is not the creature itself, but an echo, a reminder that life leaves marks even when it does not mean to. Perhaps a civilization left echoes too, but ones we have not yet learned to read. Perhaps some strange layer of mineral, some unusual distribution of sediment, is not just geology but the faint memory of lives lived together, tools used, fires tended. We also must remember that fossils tell us about survival as much as erasure. They remind us that life, fragile as it is, can sometimes endure across impossible spans of time. A leaf pressed into stone, a tooth glinting after 100 million years, a skeleton preserved in fine detail. All of these are proof that the earth does not erase everything. Some things remain. If we let ourselves wonder, then perhaps some trace of civilization, however faint, remains too, waiting for the right eyes to recognize it. But perhaps fossils also teach us another lesson. Civilization may not need to be remembered forever to have mattered. Just as the vast majority of creatures left no fossil behind, yet still shaped the ecosystems of their time, so too might a civilization have mattered deeply in its own moment, even if no echo remains. Fossils whisper to us that most of life is forgotten, yet none of it was meaningless. Each creature played its part, each life left ripples. Civilization too might have been a ripple, now gone, but still part of the great flow of Earth's history. There is something soothing in this perspective. We are so used to thinking about permanence, about legacy, about what will remain when we are gone. But fossils remind us that impermanence is the rule, not the exception. What survives is a gift, not a guarantee. If we accept that, then the possibility of lost civilizations among the dinosaurs does not feel tragic. It feels natural. They lived, perhaps, and then they vanished, as we all do. The Earth carried them for a time, and then it carried on. When you next think of fossils, perhaps a trilobite in a museum, or the towering bones of a sauropod, remember that they are not complete histories. They are fragments, echoes, accidents of memory. They tell us what happened only in glimpses. Between those glimpses lies silence, and within that silence there is space enough for wonder. Space enough to ask what else might have lived, what else might have thrived, and what else might have been forgotten. So, when we imagine civilization in the age of dinosaurs, we need not be frustrated by the lack of fossils to prove it. We can accept the silence as part of the story. A silence that invites us to listen more closely, to imagine more deeply, to let the echoes of stone and bone mingle with the whispers of possibility. Perhaps there were no civilizations then. Perhaps there were. The fossils will not tell us. They cannot. They are too sparse, too selective. What they do tell us, however, is that life has always been richer than the fragments we hold in our hands. That truth alone keeps the door open, inviting us to wonder about what else might have once walked the earth, and what echoes may still be waiting to be found. 8. The problem of scale. When we try to imagine a civilization living during the age of dinosaurs, one of the greatest challenges is not the absence of evidence, nor the mystery of their tools or cities, but the simple problem of scale. Scale of time, scale of size, scale of perspective. Our human story is a narrow thread woven across a vast tapestry, and when we step back to look at the immensity of Earth's history, we see how fragile that thread is. The age of dinosaurs did not last for centuries, or millennia, or even the tens of thousands of years we think of as ancient. It lasted for more than 165 million years. That is a number so large it becomes almost abstract. And yet it was real, unfolding day by day, season by season, generation by generation. Within that span, entire possibilities could have arisen and vanished without ever brushing against our own story. To put this into perspective, let us imagine compressing Earth's history into a single day. Life first appeared early in the morning, with single-celled organisms drifting in ancient seas. By late afternoon, multicellular life began to stir. Dinosaurs would not arrive until around 10:30 at night. They would dominate the stage for more than an hour and a half of this metaphorical day, finally vanishing just before midnight. Humans, by comparison, would not appear until the last second, barely more than a flicker in the darkness before the day ends. It is humbling to realize that we measure history by our own presence, when in truth we are but the briefest of shadows compared to what came before. Now imagine within that enormous stretch of dinosaur time the possibility of intelligence, of civilization. A civilization need not last millions of years to matter. Our own has only been recognizable for perhaps 10,000 years, and yet we count it as monumental. If a civilization had risen during the Mesozoic, even if it lasted only 10,000 years, it would be as brief as a sigh compared to the dinosaurs' reign. Entire cycles of rise and fall could have happened countless times within that span, erased not by a single catastrophe, but by the slow grind of time itself. Scale humbles us because it shows us how easily something meaningful in its moment can be invisible when viewed across the vastness of ages. The problem of scale is not only about time but also about size. The creatures of the Mesozoic were immense compared to us. To live among them would have been to live in the shadow of beings far larger than ourselves, beings that dwarfed any human effort. A stone wall, a wooden structure, even a village of hundreds would be insignificant next to the passage of a herd of sauropods or the hunting call of a massive predator. Civilization, in such a world, could never hope to dominate its surroundings. It would have had to adapt, to shrink, to live in the spaces left between giants. Scale teaches us here that civilization does not always mean control. It can mean survival, resilience, a quiet persistence beneath the thundering footsteps of larger forces. Perspective is the third piece of scale, and perhaps the most challenging. We are used to seeing ourselves as central, as the measure of intelligence, as the pinnacle of history. But what if we are only one experiment among many, one expression of intelligence that happened to endure long enough to ask questions about itself? Within the scale of deep time, it is not hard to imagine that other experiments might have happened, briefly, invisibly, and then faded. Our records would never catch them. The Earth does not keep every page, it tears them out, rewrites them, buries them under new layers of stone and sea. The absence of a record is not the absence of a story. It is only the silence of scale, reminding us that most of history is forever beyond our grasp. This realization can be unsettling, but it can also be strangely soothing. We live in a culture that often strives for permanence, that wants to build monuments, to leave legacies, to be remembered. But scale shows us that permanence is an illusion. Even the greatest empires are gone within a blink of geological time. Even the grandest cities are erased. Our presence here is not about how long we last or how much we control, but about the lives we live in the moments we are given. If there was once a civilization among dinosaurs, it is gone now. But that does not mean it did not matter. It mattered then, just as we matter now, even if our own traces too will someday be erased. When we think about scale in this way, our imagination softens. We no longer demand proof to justify the possibility of a lost civilization. We accept that within 165 million years of life, anything could have happened, and most of it will forever be hidden from us. Scale tells us not to look for certainty, but to rest in the vastness of not knowing. Perhaps there were civilizations then, perhaps not. Either way, the span of time was wide enough to allow for countless possibilities, and the silence of the fossil record is not a denial but an invitation to imagine. In the end, the problem of scale is not really a problem at all. It is a reminder that we are small, and that our stories are brief, and that the earth is vast and ancient beyond our comprehension. It is a reminder that we are not at the center of history, but a part of it, woven into a fabric so large we can only see a single thread. And perhaps that is the most calming truth of all. Civilization, whether ours or one imagined in the time of dinosaurs, is not defined by how long it lasts, or how much it leaves behind. It is defined by the lives lived within it, in their own time, in their own scale, under their own sky. So let us sit with this thought, gently. The dinosaurs ruled for 165 million years. Within that time, whole worlds rose and fell, ecosystems shifted, seas opened and closed. Could a civilization have lived and vanished among them? The scale of time makes it possible, even if unknowable. The scale of size makes it humble, even if fragile. And the scale of perspective reminds us that our own story, too, is fleeting. Like them, we will pass. Like them, we will leave only echoes. And perhaps, in some far future, others will wonder about us, just as we wonder now. 9. Survival strategies. If we allow ourselves to imagine that a civilization lived during the age of dinosaurs, then one of the most important questions we must ask is how they survived. For survival in that world would not have been simple. The challenges were immense. Predators with teeth longer than a human hand, storms that swept across entire continents, forests that burned and grew again, and a planet that never stopped shifting beneath their feet. To endure here would have required strategies practical, clever, and deeply adaptive. And so tonight, we can let our thoughts drift into the lives they might have lived, into the ways they could have learned to exist alongside giants in a world so different from our own. Food is the most basic concern. In the Mesozoic, flowering plants had only just begun to appear near the end, so there were no fields of wheat or orchards heavy with fruit. Instead, the world was thick with ferns, cycads, horsetails, and towering conifers. Perhaps a civilization learned to gather and prepare these plants, discovering which were edible, which were poisonous, which could be ground into meal or boiled into medicine. They may have relied on seeds, cones, or resin-rich roots, passing recipes down as part of survival knowledge. Imagine them roasting fern roots in fire pits, or grinding cycads into flour, or storing dried leaves in woven baskets for lean seasons. These were not farms in the way we know them, but they were gardens of memory-living knowledge carried across generations. Protein might have come from the rivers and seas. The Mesozoic world was filled with fish, with ancient turtles, with small amphibians hiding in the shallows. A civilization could have carved hooks from bone, nets from woven fibers, spears hardened by fire. Fishing would not only provide food, but safety rivers and coastlines often offered refuge from the giants that roamed inland. Picture a community gathered along a riverbank, children learning to weave nets, adults paddling boats shaped from hollowed trunks, bringing back shimmering catches that fed the whole village. Perhaps their rituals celebrated the rivers, thanking them for the endless gift of life. Eggs may also have been part of their diet. Dinosaurs laid eggs in great numbers, often in nests clustered together across wide plains. To stumble upon such a nesting ground would have been both dangerous and rewarding. A single egg, larger than a human head, could feed a family for days, but the risk of approaching nests with protective parents nearby would have been great. Survival strategies may have included stealth, speed, or perhaps cooperation, with groups working together to distract predators while others gathered food. The eggs themselves may have carried symbolic power as well, seen as gifts from the earth, or dangerous temptations, or sacred objects tied to myths of life and rebirth. Shelter would have been another crucial concern. With creatures so massive, simply building walls may not have been enough. Perhaps shelters were built into cliffs, where climbing could keep them beyond the reach of predators. Perhaps they were raised above the ground on wooden stilts, safe from both prowling hunters and flooding rivers. Caves too would have offered protection, though firelight within them might have been as much a beacon as a barrier. We can imagine villages tucked carefully into places that were difficult for giants to reach, chosen not for convenience but for safety. A clearing in a forest may have been too exposed, but a hidden plateau, a rocky island, or a narrow valley could become home. Survival meant not only building but choosing wisely where to build. Defences would not have been simple. No spear, no trap, no wall could truly stop a creature the size of a tyrannosaur. Instead, survival might have depended on avoidance. They may have learned to read signs, tracks pressed deep into mud, broken branches where a giant had passed, the distant echoes of a roar carried through the air. These signs would have been warnings, woven into their knowledge of the land. Entire myths may have been built on teaching children how to listen, how to notice, how to move silently in the presence of danger. Fire may have been used not only for cooking but for protection, with torches carried on hunts and bonfires kept burning at the edge of settlements. Predators fear what they do not understand, and fire might have been enough to turn them away. Community itself would have been a survival strategy. Alone, an individual could do little against the vast forces of their world. But together, they could watch, they could plan, they could share. One pair of eyes sees only a moment. Many eyes can see across a horizon. One voice can call for help. Many voices can sing warnings that echo through the trees. Knowledge itself would have been a communal resource, carried not in books or carvings, but in memory, in songs, in rituals that taught the young what the old had learned. A civilization in this time would have been fragile, but it would also have been deeply connected, woven together by the necessity of survival. Even their relationship with the dinosaurs themselves might have become a strategy. Perhaps they learned to follow herds of gentle giants, knowing that predators rarely attacked in the presence of so many massive bodies. Perhaps they left offerings near the nesting grounds of certain creatures, hoping to appease them. Perhaps they painted their bodies with colours that mimicked the forest, hiding their presence from sharp eyes. Survival might not have meant fighting the giants, but flowing around them, finding ways to exist in the gaps between their massive lives. Storms, too, would have tested them. The climate of the Mesozoic was unstable at times, with periods of intense heat, sudden floods, and volcanic winters caused by eruptions. Survival may have required mobility, the willingness to abandon one settlement and move to another when the land turned hostile. Perhaps they built light, portable shelters, or boats that carried them to safety when rivers rose. Perhaps they stored food in hidden places, caches that could be returned to when famine came. Adaptability, more than strength, would have been the key. And so, when we imagine their survival strategies, what we see is not dominance, not conquest, but humility. They would have lived in awareness of their fragility, in respect for the forces around them. Their survival would have depended not on reshaping the earth, but on listening to it, moving with it, blending into it. Civilization in such a place would not have been grand cities or towering monuments. It would have been quiet resilience, the art of living carefully in a world not built for them. There is something strangely soothing in this vision, for it reminds us that survival is not always about mastery. It can also be about balance, about finding a way to belong in a place where one is small. If a civilization did live among the dinosaurs, their greatest achievement may not have been their tools or their cities, but the simple fact that they endured, however briefly, in a world of giants. That they found ways to eat, to shelter, to share, to dream even when the odds were immense, and perhaps that is the truest measure of civilization, not the scale of what it builds, but the grace with which it survives. 10. Possible communication. If we allow ourselves to wander into the idea of a civilization living during the age of dinosaurs, then sooner or later we arrive at one of the most intriguing questions of all. How might they have communicated? For a society to endure, it must pass knowledge from one generation to the next. It must find ways to warn of danger, to share discoveries, to build cooperation not only through actions but through words, or at least through something like words. Without communication, there can be no memory, and without memory, there can be no civilization. So tonight, let us let our imagination drift through the possibilities of how voices might have risen in a world filled with the roars of giants and the rustle of endless forests. Human language is so central to us that it is difficult to imagine anything else. We are surrounded by words, by speech, by writing, by a constant flow of symbols. But if a civilization had lived during the Mesozoic, their communication may have been entirely different, shaped by their environment, by their needs, and even by their bodies. Perhaps they had voices that echoed differently in the heavy, humid air of the time. Perhaps they used rhythm, or gesture, or colour, or scent. Communication does not have to look like ours to carry meaning. It only has to connect lives across the gulf of silence. Imagine a small community gathered beneath the ferns at dusk. The forest is alive with sound chirps of insects, the distant calls of pterosaurs, the heavy breathing of unseen creatures. Within that chorus, perhaps voices rise, not in words we would recognize, but in patterned calls, whistles, or hums. A single sound, repeated in a certain rhythm, might mean, "gather here." Another, higher and sharper, might mean danger. A deep, rolling hum might be used in rituals, echoing against cave walls, filling the air with resonance that both comforts and warns. We need not assume that language was limited just because it was different. It could have been rich, layered, and deeply meaningful, though utterly alien to our ears. Gesture may also have played a role. In dense forests, where sightlines are short and predators lurk, silent signals would be essential. Perhaps they used hand movements, or body postures, or even subtle shifts in feather or skin color if their biology allowed for it. Imagine hunters crouched among the reeds, passing signals through small motions, able to move together without a sound. Perhaps children learned these gestures as games, copying their elders, weaving play into practice until communication became second nature. Gesture is as much language as voice, and in some ways it is even older. And what about art? Art is another form of communication, one that speaks not only to the present but to the future. A civilization may have painted symbols on cave walls, carved marks into bone, or arranged stones in deliberate patterns. We might walk past such things today and see only random scratches, only natural shapes. But to them, these marks could have been words, or stories, or maps. They might have told of where the herds moved, where the rivers flooded, where danger waited. They might have carried myths, passed not only through song but through symbols inscribed into the world itself. The fragility of their materials means we may never find these traces, but that does not mean they did not exist. We can also imagine communication through ritual, firelight flickering across faces, drums carved from hollow logs, voices rising in chorus. In a world filled with danger, ritual can be more than ceremony. It can be a way to bind a community together, to remind each person of their place, to pass on knowledge through repetition. A chant can carry instructions for survival. A dance can mimic the movements of predators, teaching children how to flee or how to hide. A story told by the fire can be more than entertainment. It can be a living memory, preserving wisdom when no paper, no stone, no fossil could hold it. It is humbling to realize that communication is always shaped by the environment. Even for us, language is full of metaphors borrowed from the natural world. Our words for light, for shadow, for movement, all come from what we have seen and known. A civilization among the dinosaurs would have drawn their metaphors from different sources. Their words might have been shaped by the roar of predators, by the rush of rivers, by the rustle of giant leaves. Their stories may have been filled not with lions and eagles, but with sauropods and pterosaurs. Their entire symbolic world would have been unlike ours, yet equally rich. Of course, there is another possibility. that communication was not based on sound or sight at all. Some animals today, like ants or bees, communicate through chemicals, leaving trails or signals in scent. What if an ancient civilization did the same? Perhaps they shared messages through fragrant resins, or through pigments drawn from plants, each carrying meaning as clear to them as a written letter is to us. Such forms of communication would leave even less trace in the fossil record, vanishing as quickly as the materials themselves. But for those who lived in that time, they could have been as powerful and precise as any alphabet. What matters most is not which form of communication they used, but that they found a way to connect. Civilization requires continuity. It requires that knowledge not die with the individual but pass on to the group, to the next generation. However it was done through sound, gesture, symbol, or ritual, it would have been the lifeblood of their survival. In that way, communication would have been both ordinary and sacred, the thread that bound fragile lives together in the face of a world that could so easily erase them. As we imagine this, we might also reflect on our own forms of communication. We write books, build libraries, send messages across wires and satellites. We feel secure in our records. Yet, in the scale of millions of years, even our words will vanish. Paper burns, stone crumbles, digital files dissolve into nothing once the machines that read them are gone. In the end, our communication, too, may be reduced to silence. Like them, if they existed, we speak for now. The future may hold only fragments, or nothing at all. But that does not make our words meaningless. It makes them precious in their moment. And so, perhaps the most soothing thought of all is this. Communication is not only about leaving messages for the distant future, it is about connection in the present, about reaching across the small gulf between one life and another. Whether by voice, by gesture, by firelit ritual, or by marks carved into bone, a civilization among the dinosaurs would have lived in connection, as we do. They would have spoken in ways we can never know, and then fallen silent. But for as long as their voices carried, they mattered, and in imagining them, even now, perhaps they still do. 11. Watching the skies. When we imagine a civilization during the age of dinosaurs, we often focus on the ground, the forests, the rivers, the herds of giants that walked across the land. But survival is not only about what happens beneath our feet. It is also about what happens above our heads. The sky has always been a mirror of meaning, a source of wonder, a silent teacher. For our ancestors, long before writing or cities, the stars became stories, the moon became a companion, and the sun was a daily rhythm around which life was organized. If a civilization had existed in the age of dinosaurs, surely they too would have looked upward. Their eyes would have followed the same stars that we see now, though arranged differently by the slow drift of the heavens. Their stories, their fears, and their hopes may have been written in the same sky we still share. Imagine them gathered around a fire at night, the great forest stretching into darkness, the air alive with the calls of unseen creatures. Above, the stars wheel in silence, ancient and unchanging. Without artificial light to drown them, the night sky would have been staggering, a river of brilliance flowing across the heavens. The Milky Way, bright and full, would have stretched from horizon to horizon. Meteors would have burned across the sky, brief streaks of fire. The moon, waxing and waning, would have guided time. It is almost certain that any intelligent beings, no matter their form, would have found meaning there. To watch the sky is to wonder, and to wonder is the root of civilization. We can imagine their myths. Perhaps the great dinosaurs themselves became constellations drawn in the patterns of stars above. A predator with sharp teeth could be imagined in the curve of Orion's belt, a sauropod stretching across the arc of Draco. The slow drift of planets across the night sky might have been seen as spirits wandering, or ancestors watching from afar. The moon, glowing softly, may have been a mother, a guardian, or a warning. Each eclipse, each comet, each unexpected flash of light would have carried enormous meaning, woven into stories told by elders to the young. These stories would not just explain the world, they would anchor it, giving people a sense of order in a universe that seemed vast and unknowable. The skies of the Mesozoic were not always gentle. Volcanoes were frequent, and their eruptions sent ash high into the air. For weeks, even months, the sun might have been dimmed, the moon hidden, the stars veiled by smoke. Such events would have been terrifying, but also formative. A civilization living through them would have built meaning from the patterns of light and darkness. Perhaps they saw eclipses of the sun as the breath of volcanoes, or believed that comets foretold fire from the earth itself. Skies full of ash would not just be disaster. They would be myth in the making, reminders that the heavens and the earth were deeply connected. We can also imagine how the skies guided practical survival. Stars may have been used for navigation, helping travelers cross rivers and plains. The moon's phases may have guided rituals of planting, gathering, or hunting. Even the calls of flying reptiles at dusk and dawn could have been woven into timekeeping, their movements tied to cycles of the day and season. For people without clocks, without calendars, the sky itself was the only measure of time. To watch it carefully was not only curiosity, it was survival. And yet, the most haunting part of imagining a civilization watching the skies in the age of dinosaurs is the thought of what they may have seen without understanding. The asteroid that ended the Cretaceous, for instance, was not the first object to fall from the heavens. Meteors strike the Earth regularly, some large, some small. A civilization living in those times may have seen fireballs streaking across the night, crashing into distant forests, raising plumes of dust. To us, these are geological events, explained by science. To them, they may have been omens, or punishments, or gifts. They may have gathered at the sites of impacts, turning craters into sacred places, weaving meaning into the very scars of the earth. It is also possible that they saw the skies not only as a source of fear, but of aspiration. To look upward is to dream. Perhaps they wondered about the lights above as we do, asked if life existed beyond imagined spirits or gods walking among the stars. They would have had no telescopes, no mathematics to chart the orbits, but wonder requires none of these. Wonder is the first step, and it comes simply from seeing and asking. Even a small child looking up into the night would feel it. That tug of curiosity, that sense of vastness. Civilization, at its heart, begins not with tools, not with cities, but with questions. And the sky is the greatest question of all. We might ask, too, how their communication, their rituals, their culture responded to the skies. Perhaps there were songs sung only at certain phases of the moon. Perhaps fires were lit in patterns to echo the constellations. Perhaps they traced the movements of stars in the sand, teaching the young to recognize the guides of night travel. These practices may have been practical, but they were also sacred, blending survival with meaning in ways inseparable from each other. For them, the sky was not separate from life. It was part of it, a second landscape, one that mirrored and shaped the one below. There is something soothing about imagining this. The same stars we see now, faintly through city lights, were the stars of their world as well. The same moon that pulls our tides shone down on rivers where they fished. The same comets that pass every few centuries may have been seen by them. Startling, bright, unforgettable. The sky connects us across time, across species, across civilizations, real or imagined. To think that they may have watched it too is to feel less alone, to sense a continuity that stretches beyond human history. And so, in picturing a civilization among dinosaurs, we must not forget the sky. It was their canvas of mystery, their guide of seasons, their silent companion. Whether they feared it, worshipped it, or simply marveled at it, the sky was part of their story, as it is part of ours. The echoes of their gaze may be lost, but the stars remain. And perhaps, in some quiet way, when we look upward tonight, we are sharing the same wonder that they once felt, standing small beneath an endless expanse of light. 12. Encounters with fire and storm. To live in the age of dinosaurs would have been to live in a world shaped not only by creatures of enormous size, but by forces of nature that dwarfed even them. Fire and storm, two of the oldest powers of the earth, were constant presences. They could bring renewal, they could bring destruction, and they could inspire awe that became ritual and story. If a civilization had existed during that ancient time, its people would have learned to live with these forces, to fear them, to respect them, and perhaps even to find ways to weave them into the rhythms of survival. Fire, in particular, is a fascinating thought. For us, fire is both ancient and familiar. It is the warmth of the hearth, the glow of light in darkness, the energy that fuels engines and powers cities. For a civilization among the dinosaurs, fire would have been rarer, more precarious, and perhaps more sacred. Forests of conifers and ferns would have been prone to lightning strikes. igniting wildfires that could sweep through vast stretches of land. Imagine the sight: walls of flame rushing across the horizon, smoke darkening the sky, the cries of animals rising in panic. To stumble upon such a fire would be terrifying but also instructive. Fire could destroy, but it could also transform. After flames passed, new shoots would rise from the ashes, tender and green. A civilization might have watched this cycle and seen not only danger, but renewal, a lesson written in the language of the earth itself. The first uses of fire may have been cautious, accidental. Perhaps they gathered glowing embers left behind after a storm, carrying them carefully in bark containers lined with clay. Perhaps there was someone in each group whose role it was to guard the fire, never letting it go out, feeding it with dried leaves and resin, keeping it alive through the wet seasons. Fire would have been more than a tool. It would have been a companion, a living force to be tended and honoured. Around it, stories would be told, food cooked, rituals performed. It would be the centre of community, the heart of survival, and the spark of imagination. Storms, too, would have shaped their lives. The Mesozoic climate was volatile, full of heat and moisture, breeding massive thunderstorms that lit the skies with lightning. Rain would fall in torrents, flooding rivers, carving valleys, and reshaping the land overnight. To live beneath such skies would have been to live with constant reminders of fragility. A village carefully built along a riverbank might be washed away in a single storm. Fields of gathered plants could be destroyed by floodwaters. Children might learn from an early age to listen for the signs, the sudden silence before a storm, the way leaves shifted in the wind, the first low growl of thunder rolling across the horizon. Storms would have been teachers, strict and unyielding, but also generous, leaving behind fresh water, fertile soil, and cleansed air. Volcanoes added their own voice to this chorus of fire and storm. In the age of dinosaurs, volcanic activity was frequent and often violent. Eruptions sent plumes of ash into the sky, turning day into night, while rivers of lava reshaped entire landscapes. For a civilization, such events would have been moments of terror, but also of transformation. The ash, though deadly at first, would enrich the soil. New land would form where molten rock cooled. Perhaps they saw volcanoes as gods, their eruptions as messages. Perhaps they told stories of mountains that breathed fire, of spirits that lived beneath the ground, of sacrifices made to appease their anger. For them, volcanoes may have been more than natural disasters. They may have been sacred events, woven into myth and ritual. We can also imagine how fire and storm shaped their survival strategies. Settlements may have been built on higher ground, safe from floods. Fires may have been kept small and controlled, never allowed to spread recklessly in the dense forests. Rituals may have been tied to the cycles of storms, with celebrations after rains that saved them from drought, and solemn observances after lightning fires that forced them to flee. Children may have been taught through stories that personified the storm as a spirit, the fire as a living being not to be feared alone but to be respected. In this way, natural forces would not only shape their daily lives but their worldview, their spirituality, their sense of place in the universe. The emotional weight of fire and storm is easy to imagine. Picture a child standing at the edge of a clearing, watching lightning split the sky. The air vibrates with energy, the smell of ozone sharp and heavy. The ground trembles with thunder. In that moment, fear and wonder blend together. The child does not yet know what causes the storm, but feels its power, feels its mystery. That feeling becomes memory, and memory becomes story, and story becomes culture. Civilization is not built only from tools and shelters. It is built from the shared awe of such moments, the attempt to make sense of forces too vast to control. Even today, we echo these ancient relationships. We still gather around fire to tell stories. We still watch the skies when storms approach, humbled by lightning and rain. Our myths and religions are full of fire and storm, gods of thunder, spirits of flame, tales of renewal and destruction. Perhaps these echoes are reminders of how deeply rooted these forces are in the human imagination, and perhaps in any imagination that seeks to survive on this restless earth. If another civilization once lived here, long before us, it too would have known these forces, and it too would have been shaped by them. There is a quiet comfort in this thought. Fire and storm remind us that we are not in control, that the earth is larger than us, that survival requires humility as much as strength. A civilization in the age of dinosaurs may have vanished without a trace, but in imagining their encounters with fire and storm, we feel their kinship with us. They too would have huddled together in fear and wonder. They too would have seen the skies blaze with lightning and felt the ground tremble with thunder. They too would have known that life is fragile, but also resilient, able to endure through cycles of destruction and renewal. So let us sit with this vision. A people long gone, gathered around their fire as the storm rages outside, singing to the rhythm of thunder, telling stories to the flicker of flame. They may not have left us monuments, but they left us something else. A reminder that to live is to face forces greater than ourselves, and to find meaning in them. That truth binds us across time, across species, across the vast gulf of history, uniting us in the endless dance of fire and storm. 13. The question of intelligence. Whenever we wander into the thought of a civilization in the age of dinosaurs, we eventually arrive at a question that lingers like a quiet echo. What kind of intelligence could have existed then? For we know the dinosaurs as creatures of instinct, of power, of survival, but we rarely allow ourselves to imagine them, or any of their neighbours, as thinkers, planners, dreamers. And yet, intelligence in the natural world is never simple. It is not the exclusive gift of humans. It arises in unexpected places, in birds, in octopuses, in dolphins, in apes. It is scattered like sparks across the tree of life, each flicker different in shape, in purpose, in brightness. To imagine intelligence in the Mesozoic is not to force our own reflection onto the past, but to ask whether other sparks may have glowed there, briefly, before vanishing into time. Let us begin with what we see today. Corvids, crows and ravens can solve puzzles, use tools, and even recognize individual human faces. Dolphins invent games, pass knowledge through generations, and display complex social behavior. Octopuses, with bodies so alien to ours, can escape enclosures, learn from experience, and even seem to play. None of these creatures build cities or write books, and yet their intelligence is undeniable. They remind us that the ability to think creatively, to solve problems, to communicate in subtle ways, is not unique to us. It may be more common than we allow ourselves to believe. If this is true now, why could it not have been true in the distant past, in a world filled with creatures as diverse and adaptable as the dinosaurs? Some paleontologists have speculated that certain groups of dinosaurs, especially the smaller bird-like theropods, may have had higher levels of intelligence compared to their larger relatives. Their brains, though small compared to mammals, were relatively large for reptiles. They hunted in packs, cared for nests, and adapted to a variety of environments. It is not difficult to imagine that, given millions of years of time, such creatures could have developed more complex behaviors. Perhaps they learned to use simple tools, to cooperate in ways beyond hunting, to create rudimentary shelters or signals. Evolution does not move with purpose, but it does explore possibilities. Intelligence may have been one of those possibilities, briefly tried, briefly tested, and then erased. But intelligence need not mean technology. It could have expressed itself in ways we would struggle to recognize. A species may have developed complex social rituals, intricate communication, or rich emotional lives without ever carving stone or shaping fire. For them, intelligence might have been measured not in what they built, but in how they lived together. Perhaps their intelligence was ecological, an ability to sense subtle changes in climate, to predict the movements of herds, to find balance in ecosystems that shifted constantly. To us, such intelligence would leave no ruins, no monuments, no fossils, and yet it could have been just as profound as our own. The question, then, is not simply whether intelligence existed, but whether it survived long enough or burned brightly enough to leave an echo. Our own species is a reminder of how fragile that path can be. For most of human history, we lived without writing, without cities, without metal. If our story had ended there, would we have been counted as intelligent by some future species millions of years from now? Would they have seen the sparks of our curiosity in the scattered bones and stone tools, or would they have assumed we were just another animal, surviving and vanishing like countless others? The same could be true for any intelligence that existed in the age of dinosaurs. If it never reached the point of permanence, if it never built in stone or metal, then time would have swept it away, leaving silence in its place. And yet, we should not confuse silence with absence. Intelligence may have bloomed in forms we cannot measure. Perhaps it was communal, shared across groups in ways that left no trace. Perhaps it was embodied, expressed through dance or sound or even color patterns. Perhaps it was fleeting, a brief experiment that vanished long before it could leave a mark. We like to think of intelligence as a ladder, with us at the top. But what if it is more like a field, with countless flowers blooming and fading, some lasting longer, some shorter, all beautiful in their own time? In that field, the age of dinosaurs may have seen blooms we will never know. The question of intelligence also humbles us, because it forces us to see ourselves not as inevitable, but as one possibility among many. Evolution did not plan for us. It wandered, experimented, explored, and by chance we are here. But chance could just as easily have favoured another. A different lineage might have carried intelligence forward, or perhaps many did, at different times, in different forms. Each was subject to the same rule, that Earth is restless, that time is long, that extinction waits. Intelligence does not guarantee survival. It is only another way of being fragile. Still, there is comfort in thinking that intelligence may not be unique. It reminds us that we are part of something larger, that the universe may be filled with sparks of awareness, rising and fading like stars. If a civilization lived in the age of dinosaurs, it does not lessen our place in history. It deepens it. It makes us part of a longer story, one where intelligence is not the exception but the rule, recurring again and again wherever conditions allow. So let us sit with the question of intelligence, not as something to answer, but as something to wonder about. Could the eyes of a small dinosaur have held curiosity, the desire to understand, the impulse to share knowledge? Could voices have risen in patterns of communication carrying meaning across forests and rivers? Could rituals have bound groups together, carrying memory across generations? These are possibilities we cannot prove, but to imagine them is to honor the vastness of life's potential. In the end, the question of intelligence is not about certainty but about humility. We cannot know if it existed in the age of dinosaurs, but we can know that life has always been inventive, always been surprising, always been greater than what fossils can show us. Perhaps the sparks of intelligence rose before us, lived briefly, and were lost. Perhaps we are not the first. Perhaps we will not be the last. And in that thought lies a kind of peace, that we are part of an unfolding story much older and larger than ourselves, a story written not only in stone, but in silence, in possibility, in the unseen intelligence that may have once looked out at the same stars we see tonight. 14. Parallel experiments. When we think of civilization, we so often imagine it as a single thread, the one we know, the one that leads directly to us. But perhaps that is a narrow view. Perhaps civilization is not a single path but a pattern, one that the Earth has tested many times, in many forms, some of them lasting long enough to echo into the future, others vanishing without leaving a trace. To imagine a civilization in the age of dinosaurs is not only to ask what if. About them, it is to ask whether civilization itself might be something the planet experiments with. Again and again, each attempt a parallel story to our own. The fossil record shows us that life is endlessly inventive. Again and again, similar solutions arise in completely different lineages. Wings evolved not once, but at least 3 times, in insects, in birds, and in bats. Eyes, those delicate organs of light, have evolved independently more than 50 times across different species. Nature does not move in straight lines. It circles back, revisits ideas, tries again in different shapes. If wings and eyes can emerge multiple times, why not intelligence? Why not the complex, cooperative behaviors we call civilization? Perhaps it is not a unique outcome, but one of many possible blooms that life produces whenever the conditions are right. Imagine then that during the Mesozoic, intelligence arose not in a single place but in many. One group of creatures might have developed sophisticated communication, while another evolved tool use and another ritual behaviors that tied communities together. None of these may have lasted long enough to grow into permanence, but each may have been a spark, a parallel experiment in what intelligence and civilization could be. Some experiments may have burned brightly, others dimly, but together they would have filled the vast span of dinosaur time with moments of awareness, of connection, of possibility. Perhaps one such experiment occurred among the smaller bird-like dinosaurs. Their brains were proportionally larger, their senses sharper, their movements quick and precise. Over millions of years, they may have developed hunting strategies, shared knowledge across generations, and created complex social structures. Another experiment might have taken place among early mammals, small and hidden, yet clever, surviving not by strength but by wit, learning to communicate in subtle ways, to share warning calls, to form cooperative groups. Still another may have arisen in the oceans, among marine reptiles, or even among early ancestors of modern fish, whose migrations and hunting patterns required coordination. Each of these could have been intelligence in its own way, each an echo of civilization before civilization as we define it. The Earth, after all, is not limited in time. The age of dinosaurs lasted for over 165 million years. Within such an expanse, there was room for countless beginnings and endings. We measure our own story in thousands of years, yet within the scale of the Mesozoic, entire cycles of rise and fall could have taken place many times over. A civilization could have emerged, thrived, and vanished long before the asteroid that ended the dinosaurs, leaving no trace but the faintest ripple in the memory of the Earth. And if it happened once, why not more than once? Why not again and again, parallel experiments in thought and culture scattered across that vast ocean of time? Even now, we see hints of this pattern in the present. Intelligence has not arisen only in us. It exists in dolphins that teach their young to use sponges as tools. It exists in elephants that grieve their dead. It exists in crows that solve puzzles and pass knowledge from one generation to the next. These are not civilizations in the way we define the word, but they are glimpses of what might have been and what could be again. They are reminders that we are not alone in intelligence, that we are part of a larger pattern of awareness that flows through life itself. If intelligence has appeared many times in the present, why should it not have done the same in the past? Of course, most of these experiments may not have lasted. Civilization is fragile. It requires not only intelligence but stability, cooperation, and luck. A single drought, a single eruption, a single shift in climate could end what had begun. Perhaps there were many beginnings that never reached maturity, sparks that flared briefly and then went out. Yet even those brief experiments would have mattered. They would have been lives lived with awareness, with connection, with meaning in their own time. Civilization does not need to last forever to be real. It only needs to exist, however briefly, in the moment it was alive. There is something comforting in this view, because it frees us from the idea that we are alone. If civilization is not a singular event but a recurring experiment, then we are part of a much larger story. We are not the first to try, nor perhaps the last. We are one branch in a forest of possibilities, one bloom in a field that has flowered many times before. Our uniqueness is not in being the only, but in being the now, the one that endures in this moment. Others may have come before, others may come after, but we are here, adding our thread to the fabric. And perhaps this is why imagining parallel experiments is so soothing. It reminds us that the universe is generous, that life is abundant, that intelligence is not an isolated miracle, but a pattern woven into the fabric of time. Whether in the age of dinosaurs, or long before, or long after, the Earth has always been and will always be a place of possibility. And so we can sit with the thought that our story is not the only story, that there may have been others we will never know, living and fading quietly among giants, leaving no trace but the whisper of wonder we feel now. In this light, the question is not whether a civilization existed during the age of dinosaurs, but how many times civilization has existed in different forms, in different ages, in different guises. The fossil record is silent, but imagination is not. Imagination invites us to see civilization not as a singular miracle, but as a recurring song, sung again and again, in voices we may never hear. And even if we never know the words, the melody is enough a reminder that life is always trying, always creating, always reaching for something more. 15. Mass extinction as erasure. When we think of the history of life on Earth, it is tempting to see it as a steady progression, a line moving forward from the simple to the complex, from the small to the grand, from the primitive to the civilized. Yet the truth is less like a line and more like a series of waves. Again and again, life has risen in abundance, only to be cut down by forces larger than itself. These are the mass extinctions, The moments when the Earth itself seems to close a chapter, erase the page, and begin again. To imagine a civilization during the age of dinosaurs is to confront the reality that such a civilization, no matter how clever or resilient, would have faced the same erasures. Time does not simply pass, it sweeps clean. Extinction is not an exception, it is part of the rhythm of Earth's story. The age of dinosaurs itself was framed by two such great erasures. They rose to dominance only after the Permian extinction, a cataclysm so severe that it wiped out more than 90% of life on Earth. The stage upon which dinosaurs eventually walked was cleared by loss on a scale we can scarcely imagine, and their reign ended, as we know, with another catastrophe. An asteroid striking the Earth, throwing fire into the skies, darkening the planet, collapsing ecosystems, and silencing the giants forever. Between these two bookends, life thrived, but it thrived always under the shadow of impermanence, always vulnerable to the sudden violence of earth and sky. If a civilization had existed during this time, it too would have been subject to the erasures of mass extinction. No matter how carefully they built their shelters, no matter how deeply they carved their symbols, no matter how strongly they wove their communities, the great events of extinction would have swept them away. A flood of lava, a global winter, an ocean that suddenly turned toxic, such forces would not have spared them. Civilization, fragile as it is, depends on continuity. Extinction breaks continuity. It severs memory. It leaves silence where once there was song. We may wonder, then, if this is why we find no trace of civilizations before our own, not because they never were, but because extinction erased them utterly. The Earth is a restless editor. It does not preserve lightly. Fossils themselves are rare, the exception rather than the rule. For every creature that leaves a trace, countless others are lost without record. Even our own remains, scattered across the planet, may not endure the sweep of millions of years. A single mass extinction in our future could erase us so thoroughly that distant beings would wonder, as we now do, whether civilization had ever existed at all. There is a sobering comfort in this thought. It reminds us that permanence is not the measure of meaning. A civilization among the dinosaurs may have risen, flourished, and vanished without leaving evidence. To us, it would seem as if it never existed. But to them, in their own time, it was real. Their stories mattered, their connections mattered, their survival mattered. Extinction may erase the record, but it does not erase the reality of what once was. Lives lived, however briefly, are not undone by their disappearance. They are part of the rhythm, the wave, the pattern that flows through time. Mass extinctions also remind us that intelligence itself offers no immunity. The Earth does not measure worth. It does not spare the clever or the mighty. It sweeps broadly, taking species without distinction. Even we, with our technology, our cities, our satellites, are vulnerable. A single asteroid could undo us. A sudden shift in climate could destabilize the foundations of our civilization. We are no different in this sense from those who came before, whether dinosaur or imagined thinker among them. We live at the mercy of a planet that moves according to its own cycles, indifferent to our desires. And yet, there is another way to see this. Extinction is not only erasure, it is also renewal. Each mass extinction, while devastating, has cleared the way for new life, new forms, new experiments. The fall of one age becomes the rise of another. Without the Permian extinction, dinosaurs might never have ruled. Without the end of the dinosaurs, mammals might never have risen, and we might never have been here to wonder about any of it. Extinction, cruel as it is, also creates space for what comes next. In this sense, even the erasure of a civilization is not the end of meaning. It becomes part of a larger story, one that continues beyond it, one that opens the way for others. If a civilization once lived in the time of dinosaurs, then perhaps their end was not simply loss but contribution. Their passing may have left space for other creatures, other attempts, other possibilities. Just as the fall of the dinosaurs made room for us, so too might their fall have made room for something else we will never know. In this way, extinction is not only a destroyer, but a hand that guides the unfolding of life, shaping history in ways we cannot fully see. We might be tempted to mourn this, to feel sorrow at the thought of civilizations erased before they could endure. And it is natural to feel that way. But there is also a deep gentleness in recognizing that impermanence is universal. We are not exempt, nor were they. Civilization is always fragile, always temporary, always a moment between silences. To accept this is not despair, it is a kind of peace. It frees us from the need to last forever. It allows us to live fully in the time we have, knowing that meaning is not measured in permanence but in presence. So when we imagine a civilization in the age of dinosaurs, let us not only picture their lives but also their ending. Let us imagine them watching the skies darken, feeling the tremors of the earth, hearing the storms roar, and knowing, as we do, that survival is never guaranteed. Let us imagine them passing their stories down to the last generation, hoping that something would endure, even if only in memory. And let us imagine, too, that in their ending, they became part of the same cycle we are part of, a cycle that erases, but also renews, that silences, but also invites new voices to rise. In this way, mass extinction becomes not just a tragedy, but a truth, one that links us to all life across all ages. It tells us that nothing is forever, but everything belongs. Civilizations may vanish, but the story of life continues. And perhaps that is the gentlest comfort of all, that even in erasure, there is belonging, and even in silence, there is continuity. 16. Hidden traces. When we look at the age of dinosaurs and imagine the possibility of a civilization, we immediately face a difficult truth. The Earth does not preserve most of what passes across it. Fossils are rare, fragile miracles, born only when conditions are just right, when sediment buries a body quickly, when minerals replace bone, when pressure and time conspire to hold a moment still. For every fossil we uncover, countless others are lost, dissolved, or ground back into the cycles of stone and soil. If even bones, those hardest of remains, so often vanish, what chance would there be for the softer traces of civilization, wooden tools, woven cloth, spoken stories? The earth, in its restlessness, hides more than it reveals. And yet, perhaps some traces remain, subtle and buried, hidden in ways we may not yet know how to see. Imagine a civilization that lived not with stone monuments or vast cities, but with organic materials, woven huts, wooden boats, bone tools, pigments from plants. Such things would vanish almost immediately in the scale of geological time. Within a few thousand years they would be gone, and a few million would erase them completely. Even metal, if it had somehow been shaped, corrodes and returns to the earth. Our own skyscrapers, should we vanish, would not endure for long. Within tens of thousands of years, they too would crumble. Within millions, they would be erased, their fragments buried so deeply or dispersed so widely that nothing would remain. If our works are so vulnerable, how much more fragile would be the traces of a civilization among dinosaurs? Yet sometimes, hidden traces survive in indirect ways. The Earth keeps records not only in bones but in chemistry, in layers of sediment, in the composition of rocks. If a civilization had burned forests, the charcoal might remain, tiny black flecks in ancient soil. If they had smelted or worked with minerals, unusual concentrations of metals could linger, subtle anomalies in the geologic record. If they had cultivated plants, the sudden appearance of certain pollen types in unusual abundance might be a clue. Even now, scientists have considered what traces our own civilization would leave millions of years from now, should another intelligence someday search for them. The conclusion is humbling. Not our buildings, not our books, not our art, but thin chemical signatures, plastics hardened into strange rocks, radioactive isotopes scattered across sediments, unusual spikes of carbon in the air and ocean. Civilization, when viewed across deep time, leaves whispers rather than shouts. This thought leads us into the realm of the Silurian hypothesis, a modern speculation about whether we would even recognize evidence of a past civilization if it had existed millions of years ago. The answer may be no. The planet recycles itself too thoroughly. Continents drift, oceans open and close, mountains rise and erode, glaciers grind landscapes flat. After tens of millions of years, the surface of the Earth has been rewritten entirely. Whatever stood upon it is gone, and only the most subtle signatures remain. If this is true for us, it would have been even more true for any who lived among the dinosaurs. Their traces, if they ever were, are hidden deep in ways that may forever elude us. But perhaps not all is lost. Sometimes, the earth surprises us with preservation. In amber, the hardened resin of trees, we find insects, feathers, even traces of soft tissue, suspended in golden clarity for millions of years. In certain anoxic lakes, the absence of oxygen has preserved delicate impressions of wings, skin, even colours. In caves, mineral deposits seal layers of history, locking them away in crystalline vaults. Could it be that somewhere, hidden still, there are similar pockets holding traces not of animals alone, but of something more, patterns of symbols, pigments that once marked walls, arrangements of bones or stones that were not random but deliberate? To imagine this is not to claim certainty but to open ourselves to possibility. Even if we never find such traces, the thought of them has value. It reminds us of how fragile memory truly is. We often think of history as permanent, written, preserved, but the truth is that most of it is lost. Our written records are but a thin veneer atop the vast silence of time. Oral traditions vanish within generations. Great cities sink beneath sands, forests, and seas. Even in the span of human history, we see how much is forgotten, how many questions remain unanswered. Extend this forgetting across millions of years, and it is easy to see why the earth feels empty of such traces. And yet, the absence of evidence does not mean the absence of life. It may mean only that life's records are quieter than we expect. Perhaps the hidden traces are not physical at all, but exist within us. Birds, after all, are living dinosaurs. Their songs, their intelligence, their social behaviours may carry echoes of patterns that first arose millions of years ago. Our own mammalian cunning, our ability to cooperate and adapt, may be shaped not only by our survival after the dinosaurs, but by survival alongside them. The ways of life during that time may have left imprints not in stone, but in the DNA and instincts of the creatures that followed. If so, then the traces of those who lived among the dinosaurs are hidden not in the rocks of the earth, but in the very fabric of life that endures today. There is something soothing in this perspective. We do not need to uncover proof to honour the possibility. We can accept that the earth keeps most of its secrets, that traces are hidden, that silence is the rule rather than the exception. And in that silence, imagination becomes our bridge. We can walk quietly into the past, picture the fires burning in a clearing, the voices rising against the sound of night, the patterns drawn into the dirt, the fleeting works of hands that will never be found. Their traces are hidden, but they are not erased from wonder. And perhaps this is the truest lesson of hidden traces, that what matters most is not what endures forever, but what is lived in the moment. Civilizations rise and fall, their works vanish, their songs fade, but in their time they are real, vibrant, full of meaning. Even if no trace remains, their presence mattered. And so it is with us. Our traces too will someday be hidden, erased, dissolved into stone and soil, but that does not diminish the value of what we create now, of the connections we share, of the brief light of our existence. The earth hides more than it shows, but in its silence, we are invited to imagine, to wonder, and to find comfort in the possibility that civilizations may have lived before us, hidden now in layers of stone and memory. Their voices are gone, but the question they leave behind remains, steady and gentle. What if? 17. Lessons in impermanence. To imagine a civilization living in the time of dinosaurs is to confront, again and again, the truth of impermanence. The earth has never promised permanence to any of its creations. Mountains rise and crumble, rivers carve valleys and then vanish. Forests bloom into vast green seas only to fall silent beneath volcanic ash. Even the continents themselves drift like slow ships, changing shape across millions of years. Within such a restless world, no city, no culture, no memory can remain forever. All is temporary, and yet all is meaningful in its time. This is the lesson of impermanence, a lesson that binds us to those who may have come before and to those who will follow long after we are gone. Think of the dinosaurs themselves. For more than 165 million years they ruled the earth. Their herds shook the ground, their wings filled the skies, their calls echoed across endless forests. They seemed eternal, as permanent as the mountains. Yet they vanished in what was, geologically speaking, a heartbeat, a single impact, a single shift in climate, and their reign was over. If creatures so mighty, so abundant, could fall so suddenly, what of a fragile civilization that may have lived among them? However clever, however resilient, it too would have been vulnerable to the same forces, erased not by failure but by the inevitability of change. We often imagine permanence as the measure of greatness. We build monuments in stone, we write books, we record voices and images, believing that if they last, then so will we. Yet the earth teaches us otherwise. Stone crumbles, books decay. Even the strongest of records is eventually lost. The fossils we uncover are rare exceptions, fragile survivors of processes that erase far more than they preserve. Most of history, whether human, dinosaur, or something else entirely, has already dissolved into silence. And yet, impermanence does not mean insignificance. To live, even briefly, is to matter. A song sung once still fills the air. A fire that burns for an hour still gives warmth. A civilization that lasted only a few centuries or millennia still carried meaning for those who lived within it, even if the earth has forgotten. There is a quiet beauty in this realization. Impermanence softens our grip on permanence. It invites us to see value not in how long something endures, but in how deeply it touches the lives that experience it. A civilization among the dinosaurs may have left no trace we can find, but in their own time they would have shared laughter, sorrow, survival, and wonder. They would have taught their children, told their stories, built their shelters, and watched the skies. Their lives were real, even if their memory is gone. To honor them is not to seek proof, but to acknowledge the possibility that impermanence is the universal rule. In our own world, we resist this lesson. We try to make things last. We write histories, we build cities, we send spacecraft beyond the solar system, hoping that something will endure. And yet, deep down, we know that impermanence will reach us too. The oceans will shift, the continents will drift, and in time even the traces of our greatest achievements will be erased. One day, perhaps another species will walk the earth and wonder if we were ever here, just as we now wonder about those who may have lived long before us. This is not a thought meant to frighten us, but to humble us, to place us gently within the vast rhythm of Earth's story. Impermanence also teaches us to live differently. If nothing lasts forever, then the value of life is not in permanence but in presence. It is in the moments we share, the connections we make, the meaning we create here and now. A civilization among dinosaurs would have known this intuitively. Their world was dangerous, unpredictable, full of sudden storms and vast predators. They would have learned to live in the present, to gather joy in what they had, to find safety in community, to celebrate the cycles of nature. Their impermanence would not have been a tragedy to them, it would have been the way of the world, accepted and honored. We too can learn from this. Impermanence frees us from the illusion of control. It reminds us that change is natural, that endings are not failures but transformations. The fall of the dinosaurs made way for the rise of mammals. The extinction of one age opens the door for another. If civilizations before us have risen and vanished, then perhaps our own eventual vanishing is not an end, but part of a larger continuity, a thread woven into a fabric too vast to see. Impermanence is not a void. It is a passage, one that all life must travel. There is comfort here as well, for impermanence is what allows new beginnings. Without it, the world would be static, unchanging, lifeless. It is because forests burn that new growth comes. It is because rivers shift that new valleys are carved. It is because species vanish that others rise. Civilization, too, is part of this cycle. Its impermanence is what gives rise to diversity, to renewal, to possibility. If there were civilizations in the time of dinosaurs, their passing made way for ours. And when ours passes, it too will leave space for something new, something unexpected, something that carries the story forward. So let us not fear impermanence, but listen to it. It speaks softly, reminding us that our time here is brief, but beautiful. It asks us to cherish our moments, to live fully, to create meaning not because it will last forever, but because it matters now. It tells us that civilizations need not endure to be real, that their lives and stories, even if erased, are part of the great rhythm of life. And in this way, impermanence becomes not a loss, but a gift, a reminder that everything is precious precisely because it will not last. To imagine a civilization among the dinosaurs is to imagine beings who lived this truth long before us. They would have known, perhaps without words, that their lives were fleeting. They would have gathered around fires, told stories beneath the stars, and faced the storms together, knowing that nothing was certain. And in that knowledge, they would have found meaning not in permanence, but in the shared moment, in the fragile beauty of life lived between beginnings and endings. And perhaps, in thinking of them, we are reminded of ourselves, that we too are impermanent, that we too will vanish, and that this does not diminish us. It makes us part of something larger, something older, something endless. The lesson of impermanence is not despair but belonging. It tells us that we are not apart from the flow of time, but carried by it, just as all who came before us were, and all who will come after will be. To live is to be impermanent, and to be impermanent is to be part of the eternal unfolding of life. 18. What if they looked at us? It is one thing to imagine a civilization living during the time of dinosaurs, quietly surviving among giants, building their shelters, telling their stories, and then vanishing without a trace. It is another to imagine them looking forward not just to their next hunt or harvest, not just to the storms and fires they must endure, but further, into a future they could never know. What if they looked at us? What if, in their rituals or their dreams, they tried to imagine who might come after them, who might inherit the earth once they were gone? We often look back into the deep past, asking if someone was here before us, if civilizations rose and fell before our own, but perhaps they too looked forward. To look forward is as natural to intelligence as looking back. It begins with simple curiosity. What will tomorrow bring? Will the river flood? Will the herd return? Will the storm pass? But it grows. Tomorrow becomes next season, next generation, and eventually a distant horizon. We know this in ourselves. Why should we think that we are the first to feel it? Picture them gathered at night, under a sky bright with stars, the air thick with the calls of creatures we will never hear. Around their fires they tell stories, as all people do. Some stories are of their ancestors, some of the spirits of earth and sky, but perhaps some are of the future. Perhaps they wondered what would follow them. Perhaps they looked at the dinosaurs so vast, so powerful, and thought, these are eternal, they will always be here. And yet, in some quiet corner of their imagination, they may have asked, what if they too vanish? What if the world shifts and something else rises? If they looked at us, what would they see? To them, mammals would have seemed small, insignificant, scurrying beneath ferns, hiding from giants, hardly the stuff of destiny. And yet, it was precisely those small creatures that survived, that endured the fires and the darkness after the great asteroid, that multiplied and spread, and eventually gave rise to us. From their perspective, this would have been unimaginable, that the inheritors of the earth would be not the massive, the mighty, but the fragile and the hidden. Perhaps this is the first lesson they might have offered us, had they been able. Never underestimate what seems small. Greatness does not always roar, sometimes it whispers. And what would they think of us now? Our cities, our machines, our satellites, our voices carried across oceans in an instant. Would they see us as the fulfillment of some imagined future, or as something alien, something beyond what they could have conceived? Perhaps they would be proud, seeing that intelligence endured, that curiosity did not vanish with them. Perhaps they would be saddened, seeing how we shape the earth with such force, sometimes without care. Or perhaps they would simply marvel, as we do, at the unfolding of time, at how the improbable becomes real. It is humbling to imagine being seen by them, to realize that we are not only the watchers of history but also its possible subject. When we ask if they looked at us, what we are really asking is whether imagination itself is timeless, whether the desire to see beyond one's own moment, to dream of what comes next, is part of the very fabric of intelligence. If so, then we share something deep with them, a kinship across millions of years. We may not share their tools, their language, or their myths, but we share their wondering gaze into the future. There is also a gentleness in this thought, for if they imagined us, even vaguely, then we are part of their story. Just as we imagine them into being, they may have imagined us. Across the gulf of time, imagination becomes a bridge, connecting lives that never touched, civilizations that never met. In a sense, we are answering their questions simply by existing. We are the what if they may have spoken of. We are the continuation of the thread they may have sensed but could not see. And yet, we too will look forward, just as they may have done. We wonder who will come after us, Who will inherit the earth once our time has ended? Will it be another intelligence, rising from the oceans or the forests? Will it be something beyond biology altogether, machines or forms we cannot imagine? Just as they could not have foreseen us, we cannot foresee what comes next, but the act of wondering binds us together across ages. To ask, what if, is to be part of the same chain of curiosity, stretching back through time, stretching forward into futures unknown. Perhaps this is why imagining them looking at us feels so soothing. It reminds us that we are not alone in our wondering, that curiosity is not uniquely ours but a part of the larger pattern of life. We are not the first to ask who came before, nor the first to ask who will come after. We are participants in an endless cycle of questions, passed from one age to another, even if the answers are never known. And in that cycle there is continuity, belonging, a sense that we are part of something greater than ourselves. So let us hold this thought gently, that somewhere, millions of years ago, a fire burned in the night, voices rose in story, and someone asked what would follow after. They could not have known us, could not have named us, but in their question we were already present, waiting. And now, here we are, looking back at them, imagining their lives, giving them space in our own stories. In this way, time folds softly, and we and they meet not in evidence, not in proof, but in imagination, in wonder, in the simple act of asking about each other across the vast silence of history. 19. Civilization as a cycle. When we think about civilization, it is tempting to see it as a straight line, moving forward through time, beginning in simple forms and rising steadily toward complexity. This is how we often tell our own story, from scattered hunters and gatherers to villages, from villages to cities, from cities to the vast interconnected world we inhabit now. But perhaps civilization is not a line at all. Perhaps it is a cycle, a rhythm, a pattern that appears, disappears, and then appears again in new guises. To imagine a civilization in the age of dinosaurs is to imagine that our story may not be the first nor the last, but part of a repeating pulse of rise and fall that belongs to the Earth itself. We already see hints of this cyclical nature in our own history. Human civilizations have risen and fallen many times. Ancient empires built great cities, carved monuments, filled libraries, and ruled vast lands. And then they collapsed, their monuments weathered, their libraries burned, their cities swallowed by sand, jungle, or sea. Each fall seemed like an ending, and yet life continued, and new civilizations arose in their place. The ruins of Mesopotamia gave way to Greece, Greece to Rome, Rome to the medieval world, and so on. We measure these cycles in centuries, but what if we stretched our view to millions of years? Might we see even deeper cycles, not only of human cultures, but of civilizations entirely unlike our own? The Earth itself is cyclical. Continents drift together and then break apart. Oceans rise and fall. Climate warms and cools. Extinctions sweep away the old and open space for the new. Within these cycles, civilization may also follow its own rhythm. Beginnings sparked by intelligence and cooperation, periods of flourishing, and then inevitable declines, erased by time or catastrophe. If we see ourselves in this pattern, then we are not a unique exception, but part of a repeating song the Earth has been singing for ages. A civilization during the time of dinosaurs would have been one verse in that larger song. Perhaps they rose in some quiet corner of the world, small at first, then more complex, then more connected. They may have endured for thousands of years, even tens of thousands, building their culture, shaping their myths, finding balance in their dangerous world. Then, as all civilizations eventually do, they would have faced decline through climate shifts, storms, predators, or simply the gradual unraveling of memory. Their story ended, but the cycle continued. Millions of years later we picked up the thread, and here we are, telling our own version of it. The idea of cycles is humbling, because it suggests that permanence is not the point. Civilization is not meant to last forever. It is meant to bloom, to flourish, to pass, and then to give space for what comes next. Just as forests burn and regrow, just as rivers flood and recede, civilization rises and falls as part of the rhythm of life. To us, this may feel tragic. We want our works to endure, our stories to last. But from the Earth's perspective, it is simply natural. The fall of one age allows the rise of another. The silence after collapse is not emptiness but potential. Perhaps this is why imagining civilizations before us is so calming. It suggests that we are not alone in our impermanence. Others may have walked this path before, and others will walk it after. We are part of a cycle larger than ourselves, one that connects us across time not through direct memory, but through shared participation in the rhythm of rise and fall. This cycle does not diminish our meaning, it enriches it. It places us within the great continuity of life, where endings are always followed by beginnings, and nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. We might ask, too, what lessons such cycles hold for us. If civilizations before us rose and fell, what can we learn from their imagined stories? Perhaps that greatness does not lie in how long a culture endures, but in how it lives while it lasts. Perhaps that humility is wiser than conquest, balance more enduring than domination. A civilization among dinosaurs would not have been able to control their world. They would have learned to live within it, to adapt, to find harmony with forces larger than themselves. In their impermanence, they may have discovered a kind of wisdom we often forget, that survival is not about permanence, but about presence. Our own cycle will one day end, whether by slow decline or sudden catastrophe. This thought may seem frightening, but it can also be soothing, for it means that our story is not isolated. We are not alone in facing impermanence. We are one thread in a vast tapestry, one verse in an endless song. And just as life continued after the fall of past civilizations, so too will life continue after ours. Something new will rise, as it always has, shaped by the conditions of its time, carrying forward the rhythm of beginnings and endings. So let us imagine this. A civilization long ago, watching the stars, telling stories, living their fragile lives in the shadow of giants. They rose, they endured, they vanished. Millions of years later we do the same. Millions of years from now, perhaps others will rise in our place. None of us will last forever. But together, across time, we form a cycle that is larger than permanence, a cycle that belongs to the earth itself. Civilization is not a line, it is a rhythm, a pattern of appearing and fading, a gentle wave that carries us all. And perhaps this is the most comforting thought of all, that we are not required to last forever to belong. We belong because we are part of the cycle, because we are here now, because our presence is one verse in the eternal song of life. Civilization may rise and fall, but the rhythm continues, and in that rhythm, nothing is truly lost. 20. Gentle closing reflections. As we reach the end of this long journey through imagination, we find ourselves holding a question that has lingered quietly through each chapter. What if a civilization lived during the age of dinosaurs? We have wandered through the lush forests of the Mesozoic, walked in the shadows of giants, and listened to the soft possibilities of lives that may have risen and vanished before we ever arrived. We have thought about their survival, their communication, their rituals, their encounters with fire and storm, their watching of the skies, and even their impermanence. And now, as we close, perhaps it is not answers we hold, but a gentler gift, the permission to wonder, and to let that wonder bring us a calm awareness of the vastness of time. The age of dinosaurs is often pictured as a stage for animals, as though it were only a prelude to us waiting for the curtain to lift on the human story. But perhaps it was more than that. Perhaps it was full of voices we will never hear, ideas we will never touch, civilizations we will never know. Even if none of them endured, even if none left a trace we can find, they may still have mattered deeply in their own time. And that thought, though speculative, is soothing, because it reminds us that meaning does not depend on being remembered. Meaning belongs to the moment of living. If there were civilizations then, they are gone now. Their fires have cooled, their voices silenced, their shelters lost. And yet, by imagining them, we give them a kind of presence again, if only within our minds. We allow them to walk beside us for a while, to share their world with us, to remind us of the fragility and beauty of life. In doing so, we also remind ourselves of our own impermanence. We too will pass. Our cities will crumble, our languages will fade, our traces will vanish. But just as with them, our absence will not mean we never mattered. It will mean only that we belonged to our moment, and our moment had its time. There is comfort in knowing that the earth has carried countless stories, most of them forgotten. The forests have heard songs that are now silent. The seas have seen creatures whose shapes are long dissolved. The skies have been watched by eyes that left no record. All of these were real, and all are gone, and yet the earth continues, endlessly renewing, endlessly allowing new lives, new stories, new civilizations. If there were beings who looked forward and imagined us, then in some way, we are their answer. And if we look forward now and imagine others who will follow, then perhaps we are leaving space for them to exist, even if we never meet them. What we find, in the end, is not a need for certainty. We do not need to prove that a civilization lived among dinosaurs, or to find fossils of their tools, or to uncover ruins of their cities. It is enough to sit with the possibility, to let the question itself calm us, because it stretches our sense of time and humbles our sense of importance. We are not the first, and we are not the last. We are one part of something vast, something cyclical, something mysterious. And within that vastness, our small lives gain a kind of gentle significance, not because they are permanent, but because they are fleeting. So perhaps the closing reflection is this: to live is to be temporary, but to wonder is to touch something eternal. When we ask if a civilization once lived during the age of dinosaurs, we are really asking about possibility, about continuity, about the endless creativity of life. We are asking if we belong to a larger story, one that began long before us and will continue long after, and the answer, whether spoken in certainty or silence, is yes. We belong. We always have. As you rest now, let this thought settle softly, that across millions of years, beneath stars that shine unchanged, life has risen and fallen, countless times in countless forms, that civilizations, whether real or imagined, are all part of the same unfolding, the same rhythm, the same story of Earth, and that you, here in this moment, are part of it too. Your life, your presence, your awareness, however brief, carries the same weight as theirs once did, the same beauty, the same fragility, and with that, we leave the question where it began, not answered, but open, like the sky above the ancient forests, like the horizon that always waits. What if? It is a question that soothes, because it does not need a conclusion, it only needs a listener. So, close your eyes, let the images drift, the towering ferns, the silent stars, the voices by firelight, the distant thunder of dinosaurs. Let them fade into dream. And as they fade, remember that all stories, even imagined ones, are gifts. This one is a gift of wonder, of humility, of calm, and perhaps that is enough.